Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Chancellor of Cheerfulness, your Archduke of Banterbury, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your Master of Fun and Wonder, your Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your Sommelier of Sci-Fi, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett. And this is, of course, Robservations, the show about something. I am Rob-casting at you from this, the Robservatory, where dreams do come true. They're all there on the shelves. And I have to say, this is Robservations episode number 362, coming at you, towards you, broadcasting to you around the world. You, imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. And I have to say, you know, I've kind of settled into this routine, do a little YouTube broadcasting, and work on my special features for The Hills Run Red. I'm delivering 12 pieces for The Hills Run Red over the next week. It's been fun. It's been fun editing them and putting them together, and it's been fun. I haven't done special features for 6 years, really since Star Trek, since the end of the Next Generation and Enterprise projects. And I have been, don't worry, yes, I have a little bit of a cough, I understand. What people don't understand is that here in LA, it's cold and wet and rainy, and it will be for the next week. So anyone who has any kind of a cold symptoms, people are freaking out. But hey, I'm socially distanced, and I enjoy it. I thoroughly enjoy it. And I'm glad to be spending this Sunday with you. You know, I was scouring. I always want to find a good topic to discuss, but today I was like, you know, I'm backed up on letters. I don't necessarily have something to discuss. The entertainment business is shutting down, so I'm going to have to sort of shift into different gears to find subject matter to make our shows interesting, which is fine. And I'm getting a lot more requests. Somebody actually said something very, very interesting. They wanted a Google Maps street view of the Robservatory so they could just zoom in and see everything. Look, there's a lot of other people, like I always talk about Justin's Collection. Justin's Collections is a channel on YouTube. Great Hot Toys channel. I don't have his kind of a setup. I want to eventually. I have older figures than he does. He's got a lot of great figures I don't have. But I do want to do that. I'm really working on the Robservatory. I'm hanging things I hadn't been hanging before, and I will have other as things develop, as I have more time to stay at home, things will get better. But anyway, I'm glad to have you here on a Sunday. I figured, you know, why not just I guess answer viewer mail, because I have like, I don't know, 30 letters backed up. So I figured if that's okay with you guys, I'll just do that and not have today's topic and just riff on your topics, and why not? Because why not just hear from the Post-Geek Singularity community? And I think that's fun too. That's kind of what this show is all about, letting you voice your opinions through me. And in the spirit of that, let's just start. And Dean Mikitich, a longtime friend of the channel, people they know him, they've heard from him. He has a letter. Hi, Rob, in the Post-Geek Singularity. Rob, in episode 358, you mentioned it would be a great idea to have multiple creators come in and make Star Trek films on a budget of $10 million for a streaming service. I think this is a great idea for a few reasons. We would get different takes and stories from the Star Trek universe. It would be far cheaper than anything current Trek is doing. Picard and Discovery are both one of the most expensive shows on at the moment, and I can't see where they are spending the money, as it does not look to be in front of the camera. Shows like The Expanse are cheaper to make and look far better on screen, in my humble opinion. With multiple films, the cost of making them would come down, as the next person working on their own film could use the sets and props from the last film TV show and change it up with a bit of set dressing. They did very well in the Berman era. How many times was the Enterprise D battle bridge redressed for other ship bridges or locations? Too many to count off the top of my head, but I'm sure someone in the Post-Geek Singularity could tell us. I am sure that there are more bonuses to this that I can't think of at the moment. But one issue that would still remain is there still needs to be someone to oversee the franchise. It can't be someone like Kurtzman that just sees it as a payday. It needs to be someone like Berman that can keep the projects in budget, but at the same time have respect for what has come before, i.e. know the franchise canon, and if not, hire someone that does. This way, if a creative came in to make their Star Trek project and it does not fit with per 2005 canon, those in charge can work with the creator so that it fits with canon, or let the fans know in advance that this is an alternative timeline or take. If this were to happen, fans would be less likely to rip these projects due to not fitting in with canon, and etc. I think if Kurtzman had come out and said that Discovery and Picard were not part of the 2005 canon and the alternative timeline, or was part of the Kelvin timeline, fans of the franchise would have let a lot of the changes slide, as it would not retcon or damage what had come before. But then again, with the writing quality we've been getting from both shows, I think fans would still say it had bad sci-fi and Star Trek, laugh out loud. However, it would not be destroying what had come before. You also mentioned the studio would never do this, as it's not part of their thinking. This reminded me of why the British Secret Intelligence Service was better than the American CIA during the 20th century. The British government got bankers to set up and run the SIS, while the US government got lawyers to set up the CIA. In another word, the British was willing to do anything it could to get the information it needed, while the Americans were more worried about what laws would get broken to get it, and therefore handicapped their spies even before they got into the field. Maybe it's time for the studio to get rid of the banker controlling the studio and get the creative partner up with them. Like you said, Rob, the studios are a business that are in it to make money. But if they are unwilling to take chances and keep pumping out the same old Trek, they will eventually lose their customers to other things. Kind regards, Dean Mikitich. It's funny you say that, Dean. One of the things that I find interesting about your letter in terms of what I'm doing right now, I'm personally creating these special features for a movie that I produced and developed along with the director, Dave Parker. Now, what was interesting about The Hills Run Red, I'll tell you about The Hills Run Red. I mean, I've talked about it a little bit, but how did I come to produce a movie for Warner Brothers, executive produced by Joel Silver? And it's not something I've talked about a lot, but it is an interesting thing. So in 2006, I had started my company, Ludovico Technique. The Ludovico Technique is from A Clockwork Orange, but I started my production company, Ludovico Technique, in 2002. And in 2002, I was working at Curdy Pellerin. I was working on Lord of the Rings. And I had started to get other friends of mine, like Brian Singer. I had produced The Usual Suspects DVD with Kerry David, and I worked with Dave on that. And I had a day job. And Michael Pellerin, who was the head of Curdy Pellerin, when I was bringing in things like Usual Suspects or Star Trek V or X-Men and X-Men 2, Michael Pellerin said, look, we can't, we're doing all the Disney stuff, we're doing Lord of the Rings, we can't do more. Why don't you start your own company? So my day job, which was producing DVD special features, my boss told me to go start my own company to produce DVD special features jobs that I was getting in on my own because of people I knew or people I'd worked for. And that was kind of odd, but I did it. And I was able to bring in Dave Parker, and the jobs got bigger and bigger. Ludovico Technique, we worked on X-Men 1.5 and X2. We worked on Valley Girl. We worked on Star Trek V. We worked on Chronicles. Our first big job was Chronicles of Narnia, then Superman Returns. And when we finished Superman Returns, there was a company called Fever Dreams that was an adjunct. I mean, they had like Tokyo Shock, and they came from Media Blasters. They were a subsidiary of Media Blasters. And Fever Dreams had produced two movies on their own, like Shadow, Dead Riot. And there was John Carcietta and Carl Morano, who were part of that company. And through Dan Schweiger, they had come to me because they like free enterprise. And what they wanted to do was they were making movies at $350,000 a pop. And they wanted to they were not happy with the films that they had made. And they came to me, which was very flattering, thinking that I could do something better. And I said, okay. So we started to develop The Hills Run Red and it was going to be a $350,000 movie. So there were two movies that they wanted to make. One was called Wicked Lake that I ended up not working on, but we were going to do Wicked Lake and Hills Run Red, and I had said, look, why don't we do them both? And we'll keep the same crew, and Dave will direct one, I'll direct the other. I responded more to Wicked Lake, and Dave responded more to the Hills Run Red, because he'd always wanted to make a slasher movie and create a new slasher character, and we had the babyface character, and Wicked Lake had to deal with basically hot chicks that were witches exacting their revenge. So you do the math. So we were going to do those both. Then it was decided not to do those both. And when I had put Dave Parker forward as the director, they were they had some trepidation about that. So they wanted us to make a teaser trailer so Dave could prove his directing mettle, and frankly, I could show my producing mettle, because I wanted to produce a movie. I didn't want to direct this movie. My desire was I wanted to produce a movie on my own. And since they were going to bring in the financing, I'd be able to produce a film on my own and show somebody that how far we could stretch the dollar. Because I had been working on large budget. I mean, I'd been on the sets of X-Men 2, Chronicles of Narnia, Superman Returns for years. Like, I was watching, not unlike Kevin Feige, I was watching, even though I was a documentarian, I was on these sets and I could talk to anybody in any department. And because I was working for the directors, I was seeing things at the very highest level. How do movies get made? In a way, I was apprenticing. I'd already directed Free Enterprise, but I had spent years apprenticing on the sets of monster projects. Narnia and Superman Returns were at the time two of the most expensive movies ever made. And I was there in and out of the producer's office. I literally saw these films on every level get made, because I could literally go anywhere with cameras and watch all this stuff. So I'd learned a great deal, and I wanted to produce a movie to show what I had learned about producing. Now, what was interesting about that is that we ended up making Hills Run Red. I was able to, through my connections, flip it to the studio, and Fever Dreams couldn't believe it. And what Fever Dreams had us do, the proof of concept that Dave Parker, he had to make this teaser trailer to show his vision, and I could produce it. We did that. And it was pretty impressive. And then I got a buddy of mine, Dave Scow, who I met he was a favorite novelist of mine. He was one of the original splatterpunks from the 80s. He had written the script for Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, which is the first movie I had worked on. We had maintained a friendship, and anybody who's part of the horror community in LA, all the horror filmmakers, we all know each other. And so I got Dave Scow to rewrite their script, because they said I could do anything to it. And we made this movie. But what was interesting about that movie is we made it under the auspices of Warner Brothers and certain parameters. And it was interesting. We didn't have a lot of money. So when I was involved with the Axanar project, and there's a lot that's been written about Axanar, you can find out, I'm very proud of our short film, Prelude to Axanar. Now, I edited the film. I was brought on board by Christian Gossett, an old friend of mine who was directing. I didn't know Alec Peters. I'd never met him before. I'd heard of him. I didn't know him. But I ended up editing Prelude to Axanar. And Prelude to Axanar was finished for just a little bit over $100,000, 20 minutes short. And it did very, very well. The rest was sort of history. And then I was tasked later to, we were gonna make the mandate was, after Christian left, I wanted to make a feature film that looked like $100 million Star Trek movie for less than a couple of $1 million. That was the job. So I was starting to do that. Now, my job was creative. I didn't handle any of the money. It was just purely creative. And sort of as I was to show what I could do with very little money. And so I did what we affectionately call the Vulcan scene. And if you go to Axanar, the Vulcan scene, you can see what I did. Now, Alec will tell you it probably cost about 20 grand. It was really about 15 grand. $15,000. It was a 3-minute scene. And it was shot in a parking lot with only a 20 by, which is 20 foot by 20 foot, a 20 foot by 20 foot green screen tarp. We shot it mostly under available light, because that was the whole point. I wanted to use real sunlight to light the sequence, and it was all done with a green screen, and it was done as a proof of concept. So it's not perfect. And my lead actress, Kim Fitzgerald, my original actress became sick, and we had already planned the shoot. So at 9 p.m., the night before the shoot, and call time was 6 a.m. I called a friend of mine in, a great actress, Kim Fitzgerald. I said, you got to come in. You got to play my female lead in this. She didn't know anything about this project. And she came in at 6 in the morning. She literally, so talk about independent filmmaking. If you look at the Vulcan scene, Axanar, the Vulcan scene, that I conceived of and directed and co-wrote, even though I'm not credited as that, I did co-write that scene. I did everything on it. Designed the effects sequences, and then Tobias Richter beautifully created, it was my idea how to shoot it, but Tobias Richter at the Lightworks in Germany did all the VFX, and we went back and forth and storyboarded everything. It was amazing. So what's interesting is, with your idea, I will hold up the Vulcan scene. While I don't think it's perfect, and it was always my intent to reshoot it, this was just a proof of concept to show what we could do. And I would put that up against the visual effects in Enterprise, and I was going to do a feature film that way. Now, we had built sets, and this was all done, the Vulcan scene's a virtual environment, but I do think that it is possible. And I think with the Star Trek franchise the way it is, it would be really interesting if Paramount were to build standing sets on the Paramount lot. Now, it would be expensive because you can't shoot on the Paramount lot because it's a union lot, so you can't like do it run and gun, down and dirty. But still, what was interesting about the original Star Trek is you had two series, I mean, not the original Star Trek, but the Berman era of Star Trek after Deep Space Nine debuted. You had Deep Space Nine and Next Gen in production concurrently. Then you had Deep Space Nine and Voyager in production concurrently. So there was a lot of amortizing of the assets. And I think with the new streaming world that we live in, if you were interested in making great Star Trek, and if you were to go back to the mentality of not having holographic displays in every scene, not having every shot be an effect shot, you'd have to really plan. I mean, do what the original Star Trek did. Mostly you're on standing sets that didn't require visual effects, and the visual effects were kept to a minimum. It would be really interesting. I think you could cut the budgets. I mean, the amount of money that they're spending is because the way they're producing the shows and the amount of producers they have, the ways they're producing the shows is way too expensive. It's just way too expensive. There's ways to do it. If you brought an independent filmmaking mindset to Star Trek, it can be done. I would look to the best of the fan films, things like Star Trek Continues. They did a pretty good job. Now, I think if you had all of the assets available, you could probably make a Star Trek series at half the price. I mean, I'll tell you this. You could make a Star Trek movie at half the price they've made the Kelvin universe movies at. Now, the whole point is you'd have to concentrate on your story as opposed to the visual effects. Star Trek has never needed a lot of visual effects to succeed. What's funny to me is they've based their entire Picard series around the measure of a man. I mean, the ideas were all inherent in lots of science fiction, but if you go to the measure of a man, which introduced the character of Bruce Maddox, which, by the way, can I just say, what a waste of a character? I mean, what they made the thrust of the story. We have to go find Bruce Maddox. They haven't even defined what Bruce Maddox was doing. You know, other than, do we really know? Like, these are Data's daughters. How do we know this? Like, they used some of his positronic matrix to clone. We don't even know. But what's interesting, they wasted that character. Completely wasted that character. But what's interesting about that episode is how you produce great Star Trek. People should look at that episode and don't give me this, modern audiences expect a lot more. No, they don't. What modern audiences expect is something that's interesting and compelling, and Star Trek has always been able to tell interesting and compelling stories without reliance on heavy visual effects. And if you look at episodes like, look no further than Chain of Command Part 2. Look no further than Measure of a Man. Look no further than Deep Space Nine's Duet. These are basically stories, they're like almost filmed plays. Hell, go back and look at the third season episode, The Empath. Look what they got away with. And I think it would be really interesting if you set up a Star Trek production house on the lot And one of the great things about Star Trek under the Berman era was they used all these assets over and over and over again. Famously, the intermix chamber in the Voyager engineering room was the intermix chamber from the Enterprise in Star Trek The Motion Picture. So I think they could do that. You would need a visionary. You would need Star Trek desperately needs a Kevin Feige. Somebody that understands the synergy between what a studio wants and how to deal with filmmakers. I mean, the great thing about the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the studio itself, Marvel, knows what they want, and they work very synergistically with their filmmakers. So the filmmakers are indeed allowed to put their imprimatur on movies. James Gunn was, no, there's no doubt Guardians of the Galaxy is his. Thor Ragnarok is Taika Waititi's. The Russo brothers owned the Marvel Cinematic Universe after they did Winter Soldier. You could actually do the exact same thing with Star Trek, but you need somebody like Kevin Feige has made the MCU his life's ambition. That's what he loves. That's what he created. He nurtured that after making 13 non-Marvel Cinematic Universe movies that were Marvel. He created the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Iron Man 1. That's what Star Trek needs. And that's what's going to make Star Trek successful is your mandate. Your mandate's like, look, cap your episode budgets. $6 million. That's it. Say $6 million per episodic. And if you're going to make a movie, $80 million. Make a Star Trek movie for $80 million. That's your budget. Work within that. Work backwards. Reverse engineer it. You could make a great Star Trek movie. You do not have to spend $150, $175, or $200 million because you're not competing. This idea that you're competing with Star Wars is ridiculous. Star Trek episodes, $6 million, movies at 80. And if you had a visionary producer who could do that, who could deliver that, I think that they should do that. They should try and do that. Now, the thing is, production companies, even Bad Robot, they make so much of their films in-house. They have huge overhead. What you got to do is you base your production company at the studio. Viacom and CBS have Paramount right now. They've got the Paramount lot. Bring Star Trek back to the Paramount lot and shoot it there. But what you need is you need a producer that understands Star Trek and also knows how to make something for that much money. And by the way, there's all kinds of people that can make that happen. But you need somebody who gets how to do that. And they're just, I don't know of anyone who might be up to that task. But I would say the studio should, can you work within that budget? Just say, I'll tell you what, we're going to give you $6 million an episode. And if you want to make a Star Trek movie, you got to make one for $80 million. And if you can do it for $80 million, then we can use, and there should be absolute synergy between the streaming shows and the movies. All of it should be of a piece. But anyway, that's how I would do it. Of course, I don't know if anyone would ever ask me, but if they did, I wouldn't say no. If you know what I mean. Because why would I say no? How would I say no? I can't say no. Anyway, this next letter comes from Jeffrey Mao. By the way, I will read anybody sending in chats and all that. I do have chats to read too. So, Jeffrey Mao, my dear Moff Ghibli. I thought that I would write about a different topic than we normally discuss on Robservations. But that is still quite topical. That is about the technicalities of film restoration with respect to transferring to home physical media. Ooh, good topic. Recently, I took advantage of the family video sale on Arrow titles, and one that I picked up was the Giallo classic Don't Torture a Duckling, directed by Lucio Fulci, which is notable just in its title, an odd animal reference that is common in the genre. The film features the legendarily gorgeous Barbara Boucher in all her legendary gorgeous nudity. Man, she is a beautiful woman. I had watched the film before on Prime, but it seemed like something I would like to have physically. I know why you'd like to have it physically. I feel you. But what is most interesting is in the booklet that comes with the packaging. Normally, you would find some writing on the transfer or restoration for the film, but in this case, we received quite an extensive and detailed article. Therefore, I'd like to highlight a few passages from the article, and hopefully you can help explain, comment, or speculate on what is going on. Obviously, I won't reprint the entire article here as it's rather long. It was written by Torsten Kaiser, the technical director of TLEF Film Restoration and Preservation Services. Their website is tlefilms.com, and you can see what they're currently working on there. The first thing mentioned was that the film process used was called Techniscope, essentially a cost-cutting measure that allowed each 35mm frame, called a 4-perf, as I guess there are 4 perforations per side, well, one side, 2 sides, sure, into a 2-perf frame. That's correct. The problem is that since projectors cannot project a 2-perf print, a 2-perf print then had to be blown up to a 4-perf print for projection. That's correct. You can immediately start to gauge the issues that would come up later on because of Techniscope, yes. The film was shot on Eastman Kodak stock but processed in Technicolor. Therefore, there's a specific color palette unique to Technicolor. This is important to keep in mind when doing color retiming during the restoration. Apparently, they were dissatisfied with the quality of the original 2K scans. Nonetheless, and this is a direct quote, the photochemical and digital qualities of the scan, however, were vital for ensuring the best results for the restoration. I'm not exactly sure what he means by this, but I can only guess that he's saying that they used the initial scans to make sure that they were getting a better result in their later scan. They negotiated to try and rescan the negative, but because of its fragile condition, it could not leave Italy. The original camera negative suffered from thousands of scratches, torn and missing frames, thick splices from bad editing, and chemical deterioration. The editing of the 2-perf negative also presented challenges. Apparently, the problem with 2-perf, 4-perf deal is that on the original negative, you can have the top 2-perf frame being the end of one shot and the bottom being the beginning of another, or just black, and the bottom being the beginning of another, or on the original 4-perf intermediate negative had too many frames left in some cases from an entirely different film, and also too many frames left out. They had to use the 2-perf negative to correct that. The original Kodak 2-perf negative and duplicate 35mm 4-perf negative were both scanned in 2K for the restoration. They then color retimed it, and they had to clean and repair all the scratches, warps, tears, and stains. So that was kind of an interesting story and insight into the difficulties of restoring older films. We usually don't get these stories, and it's a testament to companies like Arrow who put a priority on bringing some of these neglected classics back to former glory. Thanks, Jeff. Well, look, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on a technical discussion about the restoration of film, but let's just cover the basics. Obviously, any movie shot on film has to be scanned into using, whether it's a telecine machine, whatever kind of machine you're using. To keep it simple, you literally have to scan the negative, and scanning the negative is just what you'd think. Each frame of the negative is literally scanned. And what a scanner does, ideally you want to go back to the negative, the original negative of the film. Sometimes you have an inner positive, sometimes there's whatever you have available. You want to go back to the original negative, but obviously the original negative, sometimes it is old and it's not in great shape because you're dealing with the physicality of it all. And when you talk about thick splices, that might mean that when movies used to be spliced together, it was literally a glue or a tape or some kind of adhesive that literally you had two pieces that had to be put together. That's how it was cut. I mean, literally it was all physical. And the physicality of all this is problematic. Movies were very mechanical. The negative went through a camera with sprocket systems. I mean, it was literally things that were literally being pulled and moved at a certain frame rate, 24 frames a second. It was all very physical. And film is not exactly the most resilient thing in the world. Celluloid can be pretty resilient, and every time and here's another thing that happened. So once all these movies were put together, before television, and even with television, the advent of television, movies themselves, and a lot of these movies that were cult films or whatever, not many people thought a lot of these giallo movies that had a lot of violence, a lot of nudity, were ever going to air on certainly domestic television. So whenever you needed to make a print or something, you'd have to pull the negative back out and create a print. So these film elements were handled, and they were physical. And every time you handled them, you could get fingerprints on them, you could tear them. And so that's why that happened. I mean, the physicality of film, of cut negatives, there was no way around the fact that there was wear and tear that was going to happen. And it's also true, yes, that when you were shooting in things like Technoscope is, to keep it easily understood. All of these processes were, at first, basically everything was the same, and then when TV came into play, they wanted to get bigger, they wanted to get wider, they wanted to get people to come into the theaters. So you had everything from CinemaScope and Technoscope and Tohoscope, and I'm a big fan of the wide screen Tohoscope, and then the lenses. There's certain Japanese lenses that they made. They're all amazing, and it was all to compete with television to make movies bigger. So beginning really in the 50s, you saw many. VistaVision was another different thing, and some of them all had different perfs, 2 perf, 4 perf. It was just all different, and there was not a lot of uniformity, and different countries focused on different things. It was kind of a mess. It's like nobody sat down and had a worldwide standard. It's just like when television came out, they didn't come up with a worldwide standard either. You had NTSC, you had PAL, you had CCAM, so it was problematic. But so in the restoration of movies, you're dealing with what the film was shot in, and a lot of the time, like Italian movies, they weren't even shot with sync sound. They were shot MOS, mid-out sound, which means they're not recording dialogue when the actors are saying it, but they don't record sound, and they put it in later. And it also made it easier. A lot of the Italian movies were dubbed into multiple languages, and it was crazy. So when they were restoring these movies, it's not an easy thing to do, and especially the older the film elements get, the more brittle, the more they're not as fresh as they used to be. So it's a chore, and it's expensive. And that's why, in order to restore a movie that was shot on film, like my own film, Free Enterprise, I've priced it out. But yeah, I could do it a little cheaper, but it's basically about $100,000. If I wanted to scan Free Enterprise in 4K, it would, and that's just to get the scan. That's not to do a new sound mix. That's not to do any kind of editorial. But it's expensive. And, you're essentially dealing with the physical restoration. I mean, movies are the images when light's projecting through them, but you're dealing with the restoration of the negative. And there's no way around it. And one of the reasons I'm so excited about Second Sight's release of Dawn of the Dead is because Richard Rubinstein has given them access to the original negative elements, which is exciting because we're going to get the best version of Dawn of the Dead probably ever that we're ever going to see. And remember, Dawn of the Dead is over 40 years old now, and it's great to be able to get this kind of a restoration. So I'm very, very, very excited about it. I mean, I could go into it, but I don't want to. I just don't want to go into the weeds. But in a nutshell, you basically have this physical storage medium. By the way, celluloid is still the best way to store or for archival purposes, they do color separations, these black and white color separations, and that's still the best way to store movies. And there's a lot of movies that only exist digitally that who knows if they'll be around in 30 years. I think that all movies should be put on celluloid separations and stored that way. But anyway, yeah. So that's actually it's a good question. But again, I mean, I'm not doing a very good job explaining it all, but it gets very technical. But in a nutshell, celluloid is and negatives have been handled by people. They're things that go through mechanisms, and they've been glued together, and they a lot of wear and tear and a lot of that kind of use leads to degradation. It's like having a record that's not clean. I mean, a vinyl record is a thing. Every time you play it, a vinyl record is literally a piece of vinyl that's having another, whether you have a diamond stylus, something is literally being dragged across the surface of it to create that sound. And it's eventually going to degrade just through use, no matter how well you take care of your records. And the same is true of film. I mean, it's negative as a film is something that's going through a mechanism. And that's why I have to say, another thing I wanted to deal with is that every film stock is different. So let's say you wanted to use Fuji stock, you wanted to use Kodak stock, whatever kind of stock you were using, it has a different look. Every film stock is different. The grain structure of the film stock is different. So what they want to do is you want to be able to digitally in your scan, digitally recreate the feel of the film stock. So if you're using Fuji stock or you're using Kodak Vision stocks, which is what we shot Free Enterprise on for the color, how it retains color and how it reproduces color, you want your scanner, you want to be able to reproduce that through your scanning and your color grading or color timing. So that's also very important because a DP usually picks out these things for a reason. So you most want to be able to recreate what the director of photography was going for when the film was originally shot. And unlike today, now we're shooting so many things digitally and so many filmmakers know that they have a lot of latitude. Like you shoot in the red, you shoot with a certain LUT, you shoot with a red or an Alexa or something. There's a LUT that you, it's basically a lighting table that you're shooting with, and you want to be able to recreate that when you're color timing your film. And so it's really important to know, not just have the negative, but to know exactly what it is that you're trying to recreate. And that's really, really, really important. It's really, really important. So yeah, anyway, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but I know that people are sending in these things. Attic Hatch. Actually, I'm going to have to put my glasses on now, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize for that. Attic Hatch sends in a tip and says, one last try. The last 2 or 3 messages I've sent were never read. Really? I often can only get to the live chats near their end. Maybe these messages end up in some tween episode limbo. It's a shame because they were profound and solved all of life's dilemmas. Well, Attic Hatch, I will go back and look into that. Willa says, unfortunately, I can't get my mom to watch any movies. She just has The Sound of Music playing on a loop on Disney Plus, and even when she's not watching the movie, she's singing songs from it. This has been going on for about a month now with no end in sight. Well, why is that? Why is your mom only obsessed with The Sound of Music? This doesn't seem... I understand. Are you trying to get me to watch? Are you trying to get me? Is this a clever ploy for you to get me to watch Sound of Music so I can bond with your mom on the Sound of Music tip? Is that what you're going for? Is that what you're trying to do? Are you trying to? No, I understand. She needs to. Your mom needs to branch out. But you know what? If she likes it, she's like a kid watching her favorite or his. If you have a kid that watches the same movie over and over again, that's kind of where your mom's at. And I would say allow her to do that, but tell her she's got to branch out. She has to be a more well-rounded person. Tell her I said so. Tell her until she can get through Gladiator, she can't watch Sound of Music anymore. Actually, take the Disney Plus app off of your streaming, whatever it is. Do you have an Amazon Fire Stick or something? Just get rid of the app and don't tell her why. And say, Mom, you could try Gladiator again, and maybe if you watch Gladiator, maybe we'll see it come back. It'll be great. But yeah, that would drive me crazy. Calvin sends in a tip and says, why in the 007 movies have we never got to see Bond's housekeeper, May? I loved her in the Fleming and Gardner books. Have you read them? Yes, I've read all the Ian Fleming books, and I've read all the John Gardner books, beginning with License Revoked. At one point, they were going to call License to Kill License Revoked, but people said, I remember hearing that, well, people don't know what the word revoked means. I was like, what? Anyway, I think License to Kill is a better title than License Revoked. But I don't know why because I guess Bond has never really been home. We've seen Bond's house very few times. I think we've seen it more in the Daniel Craig versions of Bond than anywhere else. We just haven't seen it much. Calvin also tips, how do ships on all Star Trek shows and movies pass safety inspections when things burst into flames so easily? Well, I can't speak to that. I just have to say it's probably dramatic license. That's all I can think of. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. Dramatic license. That's what it is. It's dramatic license. Just a Brown Girl. No one is just a brown girl. Come on. Just a Brown Girl sent in a tip and said, I'll send you a letter. Where do I send it? Well, Just a Brown Girl, you send it right down there. Robservations, the Burnettwork.net. If you go to the Burnettwork.net, which is the Burnettwork's YouTube channel website, my website, Mike Bawden's website, the Burnettwork website. Go to that website. There's a place to send letters. So if you want to send me letters, do it at the Burnettwork, which is great. Austin Hernandez sends in a super chat and says, thanks for streaming, Unky Rob. What other hobbies do you have besides collecting? You look like you like plants, so do you do any gardening? Much love. Well, it's funny you say that, Austin. I'm not, my mom had a green thumb. I've never been much into gardening, but I do sort of take care of the garden that we have here. We have a vegetable garden in the backyard, which is a mess right now. It needs to be replanted. But we also have a French apple tree. We've got a guava tree. We've got a cherry tree. And I do take care of all the plants. I do all the watering and all of that at the house. So I do. But my other hobbies, I mean, I don't just collect. I mean, I like to build models. I like to, I guess, read. I like to ski. I'm a big snow skier, but it's unfortunate because I don't know anybody anymore in LA who likes to ski. When my ex-wife and I used to ski all the time. Hell, we went to Switzerland once. We went to Davos and spent 10 days there over the holidays and New Year's skiing. That was amazing. Oh man, skiing Davos is incredible. So yeah, I mean, I there's a lot of things that I'm interested in. So yeah. Word Balloon sent in a $1.99 super chat. Thank you for that, John. That's Word Balloon is John Suntress and the Word Balloon podcast. If you want to go to a great Word Balloon podcast or a great podcast to listen to anything about pop culture or comic books, John Suntress's Word Balloon podcast is great. So check that out. He says that, I tweeted that empty Hopper painting too. Yes, he's talking about my thumbnail. Somebody digitally recreated that that Hopper painting of the famous painting of the night owls at the diner, and I saw that empty. Somebody, it looks like it's somebody digitally recreated it. I'm like, oh, I have to use that. I thought that was great. Certainly I found somebody else had tweeted it, and that's why I used it. I just thought it was great. So kudos to whoever created that originally. I don't know who created the original version of it, but it is in the thumbnail for today's chat. I loved it. Jashan Cater sends in a super chat and says, have you seen Netflix's Kingdom? It's so much fun. Only 6 episodes per season. I would really love to get your take on the show. Kingdom is a Korean period piece about zombies like 500 years ago. 400 years ago, something. I loved it. I think it's great. I have not seen season 2 yet. Is it out? I know there's a trailer for it. Maybe they did drop season 2 recently. I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen season 2, but season 1 was great. I loved it. I mean, what a great take. The Koreans are killing it when it comes to zombie shows. I love Train to Busan. I can't wait to see Peninsula or The Peninsula, which is a sequel to it. And of course, Seoul Station was an animated prequel to Train to Busan, which you got to check out. By the way, finally got around to watching Hunters on Amazon with Al Pacino, the Nazi killing show. I'm loving it. It's up to episode 4. Logan Laren, I really like. I mean, I liked him in Perks of Being a Wallflower. I even liked him in Percy. I want to say Percy Sledge, but it's not Percy Sledge. He's great. He's a great actor. He's really good in that. So yeah, I will absolutely have to watch season 2 of The Kingdom. Can't wait. Richard Green sends in a super chat and says, with everyone hoarding toilet paper, I think it's time to start using the 3 seashells. Yeah, I think the Demolition Man 3 seashells meme, I mean, it's amazing how it's gotten a lot of play. It's actually kind of a funny scene. I was talking about it yesterday. You got to go back and watch Demolition Man. By the way, one of the writers, or the writer of that, Peter Lankoff, who is a producer of Hawaii Five-0, he married Audie England, who starred in Free Enterprise. And of course, it's the Ides of March, so yay, Free Enterprise. And yes, but the 3 seashells, yes, he wrote Demolition Man. And yes, I think that's very funny. A Dancing Dog sent in a tip and said, Robert, all of this film talk makes me think of good old Shaw Scope. That's the Shaw brothers, Sir Run Shaw. No, the Shaw brothers. One of my beloved Inframan is in Shaw Scope. Speaking of restoration, comic art also ages poorly. I own the original art from Neil Adams, and the yellowing from the old Bristol board is tragic. Excelsior. Well, yeah, Dancing Dog 60, because paper. If you don't, unless you have acid-free paper, there's acid in paper that causes it to age. And that's just a problem with the medium. And it's kind of a bummer. It's true of old comics, too. A lot of things that are made out of paper age, which is a bummer, but, you can preserve that. I guess you'd have to have it vacuum sealed or something, kind of like when you get your comics graded. Dancing Dog 60, of course, that wouldn't stop the aging process of the paper. I guess it would retard it, maybe? Would it retard the air from doing that if you have it vacuum sealed? But how do you stop? I don't know. I don't know the science of stopping paper from deteriorating. Dancing Dog also sends in a tip and says, speaking of spies, I would love to see the return of Derek Flint. James Coburn was so damn smooth in that role. What do you think could pull off, or who do you think could pull off serious Derek Flint in this day and age? Oh, Tom Hiddleston. Tom Hiddleston could totally pull off a Derek Flint. Because I would say, look, I loved Man from U.N.C.L.E. I loved seeing those two guys play, Henry Cavill and Armie Hammer playing Napoleon Solo and Ilya Kuryakin. I thought that was great. But I think Our Man Flint, because Coburn was kind of taller and thinner, I think Tom Hiddleston could be a great... For those of you who don't know, James Coburn starred in Flint and Our Man Flint or something. And it was there was a spate of movies like the Flint films or the Matt Helm films that came out in the wake of James Bond. And even the Harry Palmer movies and like Billion Dollar Brain. But they weren't, they didn't equal the success of Bond. But I think it'd be great to make Flint movies again. And I think Tom Hiddleston, that's what I think. And P.S., I think the Gorn is a cute monster. I love the Gorn. I've always loved the Gorn. I think the Gorn is a cute monster as well. But I think the Gorn's also a badass. You got to love the Gorn, right? Don't you? I do. Let's see. Here's another letter. This letter comes from Tom Bidiscum. I want to say, I think it's Bidiscum. Tom Bidiscum. Hi, Rob. I will say off the top there is a spoiler from Rise of Skywalker in this letter. So to warn any viewers who have not seen it yet, I don't think anything could spoil the Rise of Skywalker except the movie itself. I write today to give my thoughts on the current state of Star Wars. My first memory of Star Wars was watching A New Hope on VHS. I've also been very pleased with the direction Disney has taken the franchise. I love all the films they have produced in the last 5 years, and Rey has become one of my favorite characters. I respect the criticism fans have of the new trilogy and understand if your expectations are not met, it can be disappointing. I'm not blind to the plot holes, like how Palpatine was brought back for the Rise of Skywalker with little explanation. I admit in the past a plot hole this big would have bothered me, but I just accepted it. I find sometimes when films over-explain things, it raises more questions. The Force Awakens introduced us to many new characters, and as a result, some of the returning cast, such as Luke and Leia, were sidelined. It seemed Disney wanted to make this more of a new beginning to make it accessible to new fans. A criticism of the sequel trilogy is that they feel separate from the previous films in the saga. Personally, that is one of the main things I liked about it. It was like a fresh start. I loved the prequels and the original trilogy. I also love this new trilogy as well. On Rotten Tomatoes, The Rise of Skywalker has an 86% audience rating, which proves the sequel trilogy has pleased many fans. It seems like there has been a tug-of-war between the fans who grew up watching the original trilogy and new fans who have attached themselves to the sequel trilogy. I do not believe anyone at Disney wishes to see any Star Wars fans feel alienated from the franchise, but if the new generation connect to the newer films and continue to support feature films, then the Disney Star Wars era has to be seen as a success. Also, if the decline in box office taking stops and future films can average $1 billion, then Disney era of Star Wars has to be seen as a success. J.J. Abrams said in an interview, and I quote, "We knew starting this, any decision we made, a design decision, a musical decision, a narrative decision, would please someone and infuriate someone else. I personally think this is a great response. The perfect scenario when studios handle franchises is to please everyone, but that is an impossible task. Perhaps in years to come, the less satisfied fans will revisit the sequel trilogy and look at them more fondly. May the Force be with you, Tom Bidiscum." I think it's Bidiscum. Biddiscomb. Like Claude, it ends like Claude Lacombe from Close Encounters. Well, Tom, I like this letter. I mean, I think, if you like the original trilogy, or the sequel trilogy, as I've always said, you have to like things. It's good to like things. You should like things. I feel that, again, I've talked a lot about both Star Wars and Star Trek. With their corporate minders, the reason that these things exist has changed. I mean, before, George Lucas tried to convince every studio in town to make Star Wars. Nobody wanted to make it except Alan Ladd Jr. over at Fox took a chance on Lucas. I even have a letter somewhere where he said he'd made American Graffiti. He wanted to do this crazy thing. Fox agreed and let him try and do it. But at that time, Fox didn't know. They were like, well, if you believe in Lucas, we'll see what he comes up with. Nowadays, it's different. Nowadays, a corporate entity has inherently different concerns than creatives. I mean, corporations want to employ creatives to make whatever it is they want them to make, and they want it to be great. But when you allow corporate interests, where ultimately corporate interests are about making money, you have to make money. And sure, do filmmakers want to make money and become successful? They do. But when they start making their movies, what they're trying to do is make the best movie possible, and they're hoping that by doing that, they'll succeed monetarily as well. But you can't worry about the money that you might be making when you're making the film. You must concentrate on making the film the best it can be, and you hope all of those efforts will lead to financial success. A corporation doesn't want to go into making anything unless they see a financial return. So they're looking at Star Wars, and they don't think to themselves, well, let's think about the verisimilitude of the franchise. Let's think about what's canonical and what's not. A corporation doesn't think like that at all. So when they're making a movie, they have things they have to take into consideration. And all of that is what looks good on paper. What does a corporate entity see as we've got to get somebody with a track record? It's the reason why they hire Ivy League business people. At the studios, even when I worked there 30 years ago at Warner Brothers, they would hire people that either came from inside the business already or people that were Ivy League educated business people, because that's what a corporation wants to hire. There's no way that a corporation can be like, how creative is this guy? Corporations don't do that. They don't have any way to recognize that except through past success on a spreadsheet. This name made this much money. Now, how that person got to make that much money isn't really taken into consideration. They just know that A equals B. And for a corporation, they have to make those decisions, and that's how the decisions were made on Star Wars. They buy Star Wars, they spend $4 billion. Nobody is sitting there going, well, it's really important that we get Luke, Han, Leia, Chewie, R2, 3PO, and Lando back for one last adventure. They're not thinking along those lines, and people don't get that. They're thinking Disney's like, we have to have new characters for a new generation. That's what they're thinking, because from a corporate standpoint, that's the smart play, and I totally agree with them. That's what you would think about. That's exactly the smart play. Unfortunately, that doesn't play into how does a studio quantify how people love things? They don't know. They're not geared to that. So, yeah, which is kind of a bummer. They're just not geared to working in that way. And I think that, look, there's a whole group of kids that grew up with the prequel trilogy. I remember, we screamed and yelled about the prequel trilogy as well, because look, I've said those movies, I think those movies are bad movies, but they're good Star Wars. There's an interesting story ultimately being told. I just think it's ineptly told. It's weird because of the way they were trying to use the film. They're trying to use a new technology to make the film. It's very stilted. It's not great. And I think that was something that was unfortunate. It was an unfortunate byproduct of the way the prequels were made. I mean, Lucas would he didn't just use multiple takes and put them into one scene. He would take an image from one take, and because he had the digital tools, and he could move a performance. He could literally take somebody, isolate them, and take their character out of the image and put them into another. So there's in order, he did all this work, but it didn't work, I think, synergistically together. That's why the movies feel very stilted to me. But there's kids that grow up on those movies and they love those movies. And you're absolutely right, Tom. People are going to love the sequel trilogy. They're going to love Rey. They're going to love all of those characters. And I think, rightfully so. You ask modern audiences a lot. I've heard a lot of kids go back and try and watch the original Star Wars and they find it boring because of the pacing. And that doesn't mean they're wrong. That's evolution. That's how things progress. And I don't think that's a wrong thing. This is a quick letter. John R. wrote in, Rob, love your show. Don't know if you have the time, but you should use the Robservations show 360 camera to give your fans a 360 view of the Robservatory. Pan the camera all the way around. Just wanted to give you the idea. Well, John R., that day is coming, but it is not today. But I will get a 360-degree camera, and I'll be able to do that once it's all set up. It's still kind of half the Robservatory is set up, and half of it is a mess still, to be honest. And I'm excavating and slowly moving around because there's a lot of stuff that was here in the garage, not just my stuff that has to be moved and taken out. But I'm going to do that, and I am, of course, going to start the Robservatory off the shelf show, 10-minute chunks where I pull things off the shelf and riff on them. I'm going to start those this week. They won't be live. I'm just going to make them and drop them, and hopefully people will dig them. And I think that's a good suggestion, though. So thank you for that. Dylan McCandless writes in, and Dylan says, Hey, Rob, so I started watching Deep Space Nine again, partially because of how disappointing Picard turned out to be, but also because recently I finally got around to seeing the wonderful DS9 documentary, What We Left Behind. Great documentary. It's available. Shout Factory put it out. You can see it. It's streaming, or you can buy the Blu-ray, I believe. Upon refamiliarizing myself with the show and its lore, I was reminded that this show is home to one of my most despised characters in all of fiction, Vedic Wynn. Vedic Wynn, Kai Wynn. You've often said that Star Trek is a franchise about antagonists rather than villains, and for the most part I agree. However, there are some exceptions to the rule. Khan Noonien Singh is certainly a villain in the classic Shakespearean sense. And DS9, I didn't start out that way, though. He became a classic villain, I think, in Wrath of Khan, but not in Space Seed. And DS9 also gave us a villain we can all love to hate in the form of the sometimes anti-heroic Gul Dukat. But Vedic Wynn is in a category all her own. The villain who is so deluded and self-righteous as to believe herself to be right, like all the great villains. DS9 is unique among Star Trek series in a number of ways, not least of which being the show's focus on the problems of one particular race, namely the Bajorans, allowed them the opportunity to explore themes related to the topic of religion, which seems to have all but disappeared from 24th century Earth. The Bajorans are a deeply religious people, and this can often clash with their purely scientific worldview of their Federation comrades. We meet Vedic Wynn in the Season 1 finale, In the Hands of the Prophets. In a scene which should remind us all of countless incidents in our own history, she admonishes Keiko O'Brien, who has established a school aboard the station, for offering a purely scientific explanation for the nearby stable wormhole, which holds a special place in Bajoran theology. Tensions aboard the station reach a fever pitch as religion and science clash in a fashion which conjure images in one's mind of the Scopes trial. Of course, in the end, Wynn's true villainous intentions are revealed. She had caused all of this tension in order to lure another religious leader, Vedic Bareil, onto the station where he was to be assassinated. This was because both Wynn and Bareil, whose theological approaches are diametrically opposed, were both in consideration to become the next Kai, which is basically the space pope. Wynn's chosen assassin is a loyalist who would never implicate the Vedic in her crimes, and so so she slithers off to cause more trouble in the future. I'll admit that my personal feelings toward this character are somewhat personal. Having grown up and lived my whole life in the so-called Bible Belt, I've known a fair share of Vedic Wynns in my time. I'm not even really sure what I'm trying to get across in this letter, except to say that in our modern world, where movements like the Flat Earth have gained disturbing amounts of traction online, and many have campaigned to try and get creationism taught in schools, this episode is quite relevant, and everyone should check it out if they haven't already. What a great letter. Thank you, Dylan. I appreciate it. You're absolutely right. I think one of the more fascinating elements of Deep Space Nine was the Bajorans and their religion. And what's interesting is that the wormhole aliens, they for the Bajorans, they existed. So their prophets were, in fact, what they said they were. So in order to create a religion around them was not necessarily wrong. And I always found that to be interesting. And of course, yes, religion and politics have always been strange bedfellows throughout the years, and of course, I think that there's a lot of like what happened in the Vatican and the Catholic Church and all the archdioceses and all of those things were dealt with in, I thought, fairly well in Deep Space Nine, and I really enjoyed it. And I think you're right. And again, though, I think that Kai Wynn, or Vedic Wynn at the time, she really thought that what she was doing in her own mind was correct, like all good villains do. But, by the end, what happened to her by the series, I did feel for her. I do. I do. She got played. And yeah, she might have deserved it, but still, she did get played. What a great letter, though. Thank you for writing in that letter. Crosstalk says, I have a feeling after you mentioned Star Crash and Inframan that we frequented the same shelf of the old video stores. I love grabbing movies that I had no idea about just to see what was out there. The Abomination. Look it up. The Abomination, I think, if memory serves, there is a poster for The Abomination. Hang on, let me check on this. There is a poster for The Abomination in the movie Videodrome. I think. I could be wrong. Let's see. I don't know. Nope. You know what? The Abomination, it's not what I was thinking. Are you thinking about, there's The Abomination Heir to Frankenstein. There's something on Dread Central. Oh, there's a lot of Abominations. I'd have to go through and see it. I might be wrong. This is The Abomination I kind of remember. But but yeah, probably. I have not seen The Abomination. I don't know what it is, but I am absolutely sure you and I frequented the same shelf at the video store because we obviously park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. So then we probably went to the same video store shelves. Sean Pullen sent a very nice super chat. Thank you, Sean. I can't always catch lives and super chat. I can't always catch you live and super chat, so I appreciate your engaging politely with me over other mediums. Cheers. Well, Sean, I try and be polite over other mediums. I mean, sometimes it gets difficult when people say fuck you, fuck this, fuck that. Especially about, I get a lot of fucks thrown my way from other Star Trek fans that don't understand my position on Picard. I guess that's because now Star Trek has made it okay to say fuck to people, which I find interesting. But I try and be polite. I do try and practice what I preach. Sometimes my sense of humor or I do say things that are a little off color, but I do try and be polite because I do encourage everybody that watches these chats to come in and be a part of the conversation. So go to the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page. A lot of great discourse goes on there. And, of course, come here and chat and send me letters to the Burnettwork. But no, I mean, we're building a community, the Post-Geek Singularity community with you. You imagination connoisseurs are trying to keep it to be a nice, inviting, cool place to hang out. Chairman Mao sends in a tip and says, thanks for the comments on the scan transfer process. You should start. I did a very bad job on that. You should start an occasional series called Going Into the Weeds, where you cover more teachy topics. Also, I wish the Wizard of Oz 4K had something about the transfer in the features. Well, it's funny. From the Earth to the Moon disc talked a lot about the transfer, but it made me angry because they were lying. They were lying about that, but it's all right. I think, look, here's the reality of where we're at in the home video arena and physical media arena. Whenever studios can cut costs when it comes to their film transfers, they will do so. And to be fair, a lot of the time they can't find the right elements. Elements have disappeared. They weren't stored correctly, or they've just been passed around so much. I haven't actually come in contact with the elements of my own film, Free Enterprise, because I don't control the elements. That's why I want to buy the movie. If I could raise the money and buy Free Enterprise. I mean, there was one time I had a business proposal. I wanted to raise $650,000 to buy Free Enterprise and redo the whole movie in 4K and also do a new cut of the film. And that money would be, I'd have to buy the film outright from the current owner if he would. I don't even know if he'd sell it to me. But I would want to buy it outright and then do a full-on restoration just so it could exist. And it's, would that money ever get paid back? I think it would be. I think I could. I've run the numbers. I think I could get it paid back, but it still would be a process. Now I have to be content with the fact the only way to get my own movie is in a terrible 4x3 transfer that was made in 1999. Unless you bought the 2006 Anchor Bay DVD that's in standard NTSC standard definition, it's frustrating, and that's because it's expensive to get movies put out properly. And as a post-production supervisor myself, I want to do things properly, but it costs money. Luckily, with streaming, I mean, one of the great things about streaming services is it makes the assets. I mean, you have to figure out how to justify. How do you know that you're going to get the money back when you do this? When you're going into the hole. Like, let's say you spend, like, I have to buy the rights if I can get the rights, and then spend a couple $100,000, probably even more than that, to restore the movie, do a new sound mix, re-edit the film, and all of that. How do you justify that? How are you going to get that money back? One of the reasons that Star Trek The Next Generation, the restoration, was so beautifully done was you had 3 different departments paying for it. It wasn't just home video. I mean, there were one component, but it was streaming, and it was syndication. You had different people paying for that restoration, and Deep Space Nine and Voyager would cost more. But let's say it's going to cost, I would assume both are going to cost $20 million now to restore all episodes of the show. How do you get $40 million back? I mean, that's a lot of streaming. I would say they should do it because you're investing in the future, and if you went back and did it now, you could put both Deep Space Nine and Voyager into 4K, but it would still, you're looking at a $40 million investment. How do you justify that investment? How do you get that money paid back? That's the real question. I mean, I'm really happy that The Hills Run Red is coming out on home video in HD. You'd been able to get it on Vudu, but it was finished in HD, so it was shot on film and finished in HD. So I'm tickled to death that movie came out, and we're trying to make that package, the Hills Run Red package, the best package it can be. So I'm very, very excited about getting it out there, something that I produced. It really is the only movie that I developed and produced on my own. I mean, when we got to the production point, I needed, I was brought in, and it was still a Silver Pictures. It was a Dark Castle movie, but it's great to see that Shout Factory is allowing Dave and I, the director, Dave Parker, and myself, to put all of this stuff that we generated. So it's great to have it out there, but it's expensive. But yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. I mean, I'll say this. I can say this right now. So I'm a big home theater nut, and I was contacted. Many of you who watch the John Campea show, you might know that John, he got a little angry and destroyed his headphones on the stream. But apparently there's people at JBL, the speaker company. Now I've known and respected JBL for a long time. They reached out to him. And a woman reached out to him they have a division that can do that, and sent him a new pair of headphones. That was very nice. Well, I can say this. JBL reached out to me. The same division reached out to me, and they said, look, we have a new product that's going to hit the shelves in April. It is a 9.1 sound. It's a sound bar that delivers 9.1 surround sound, including Atmos. And I'm like, as a home video aficionado, I'm a little dubious. And they said to me, well, why don't you just check it out? Because it hasn't hit I would never buy a soundbar. But here's something interesting. They're not paying me to do this. They wanted me to check it out because obviously they wanted me to talk about it. But I said, you know what? If you're going to send me one of these things to look at and check out, I'm going to make a video of it and make it worth your while. And they didn't ask me to. I just said I would. I received it. I got it. It arrived, and it hasn't come out yet. And probably later today or maybe tomorrow, I'm going to make a video and drop it about this soundbar because I'm really interested. I'm really curious about this technology. Also because Elizabeth wants me to get rid of my massive speakers that are in our bedroom, and having this kind of thing could be a great thing to have. So I'm looking forward to checking it out. But I'll tell you that right now. They didn't pay me to do it. I'm just doing it for my own edification because I think it'd be fun. I've never had a soundbar before, and this soundbar has undockable. You can actually you can take out the rear surround channels and put them behind you, and it has a subwoofer. It's pretty dope. So I'm going to check it out, and as a home theater nut, I can't wait to look at it. But Chairman Mao, I am going to do kind of an into the weeds thing on it. I asked her to send me all the specs on it because I want to check it out. And I'm very excited. Chairman Mao also sends in another tip and says, Bill's review on the digital bits for the Wizard of Oz 4K fills in the gaps nicely, though. Also, I agree that we're probably seeing the film better than 1939 audiences did. Yes, of course, because now when you're making digital, look, I used to be a big photochemical freak. I would go see prints of movies, but now so many of the movies that you go see, the prints are not good. they faded, and because we don't have, now they make DCPs. And sometimes when you see a digital cinema package presented in a theater, it's pristine if it's done really well. And a lot of these 4K releases, when they go back and they do film restorations, I mean, just in the last year, my God, that Apocalypse Now 4K restoration is amazing. And seeing some of the things that Warner Brothers is doing, they go back, the Matrix 4K discs, especially the first Matrix, is light years above what we saw with the original Blu-ray releases of The Matrix. So when they're going back, I really did like the Alien Director's Cut. Some people thought it was too dark, but I really liked it. And when they're going back and they're doing these restorations of these films, they're doing them correctly. One of the guys who's working on Dawn of the Dead is one of the best in the business, and I can't wait. That's why I'm so excited for Dawn of the Dead. But yeah, I could get into that. But Chairman Mao, I think it's important. A lot of people don't spend the time. They don't spend the time doing this because, I mean, look, one of the greatest travesties I think of all time is how Buffy was turned into 16:9, I guess HD. It's really god awful, and how that was allowed to be done, and how that was allowed to be done without any participation of the original filmmakers. That's why I think From the Earth to the Moon was so disappointing to me, because they didn't have any of the filmmakers participate, which was annoying. Dirty Nerdy sent in a super chat and says, I would die for a TNG DS9 remaster, but instead I get crap like Discovery and Picard. Well, you did get the TS9. The TNG remaster, I think, is one of the greatest remasters in the history of television. Is it perfect? No. But if you were to A-B I almost wept the first time I saw when they released that 4-disc, or the disc that had Inner Light on it, and when they restored episodes, I mean, it was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. When we would get new episodes when we were making the documentaries, we were the first people to see them, and we get them as they finish them. So I get sometimes 3 episodes, sometimes 4 episodes on a drive, and it was, I'll never forget. I literally shed a tear when I saw yesterday's Enterprise come in, because they looked so much better than the original versions. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. Anonymous sent in a tip and said, sorry I didn't specify. My friends and I only ever referred to it as The Abomination, but it's The Abomination 1985. You can actually watch the full movie on YouTube. We love it, but it is objectively horrid. I love having movies like that. I do. I am a fan of that. So I'll have to check it out, because if you like Star Crash, then clearly you and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same garage, so I will watch The Abomination. I'm sure my friend Dave Parker, who directed Hills Run Red, knows The Abomination and can tell me all about it. Luke Beckett writes in. Luke Beckett writes a letter and says, hello, Rob. I know it's been a long time, but what can I say? Watching TV and watching movies gives me little time for writing letters. And I had to write this time because it seems to me you're doing the same thing with Star Trek that Star Wars fans have been doing for a long time, and I just have to say something. First, to recap, I've been a Star Trek fan since 1979, when my dad took me to see the motion picture when I was 4 years old. Good man. Although I must admit I understood very little about what was going on, I do remember being blown away by what I was seeing. That made me love science fiction and most of all Star Trek. While my friends at school were going crazy over Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, I was busy playing around pretending to be James Kirk or Mr. Spock. And I have loved every incarnation of Star Trek ever since. Yes, even the Kelvin films, Discovery, and now Picard. I do, however, also like Star Wars. What I have a problem with is Star Wars fandom, especially when they start dictating what I can and cannot like based on their expectations of what Star Wars should be. Hang on a second. Let me stop you right there. No one is dictating what you can and can't like. Let me be very clear. Everybody, you should like what you like, unapologetically. If you like something, don't let anyone tell you you shouldn't like it or you can't like it. Don't let anyone tell you any of that stuff. Like what you like. Don't apologize for it. Just like it. Don't let anybody tell you what you can and cannot like, unless it's Nazis. You can't like Nazis. You can't like Nazis ever. You can only like Nazis as villains. And that's why I like Hunters so much. I'm enjoying it 4 episodes in. But don't let anyone else tell you you can't like. If you like Star Wars, if you like Rey, if you like Star Trek Discovery, and you like Picard, you should like those things. If you're getting enjoyment from them, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter what anybody else says. And I believe that. Don't let anyone take away anything. No one should yuck your yum. Don't let anyone do that. But anyway, you do not do that with Star Trek. You say all the time that what you say about your dislike of modern Star Trek is really just your opinion. However, what you do seem to do is imply that the only way you can like modern Star Trek is if you've never seen old Star Trek. Just like Star Wars fans often make it seem that the only way you could possibly have liked the prequels is if you'd never seen the original three, which is bogus. I like the prequels, and I like modern Star Trek. Why? Because unlike you, I do not go into a movie or show with preconceived ideas. I don't either. Even with the long-running franchise such as Star Trek. As long as it is familiar enough to call Star Trek or Star Wars, I'm good with it. But then we are off to the races. Show me something new. It does not have to be exactly like everything else that came before. That would be stale and boring. So yes, I loved old Star Trek, and I'm enjoying modern Star Trek. So your theory that you can only like new Star Trek if you were never exposed to it before does not work. I never said that. Besides, you were also bent on disliking Picard from the get-go. I was not. I was very excited to see Picard. I wanted Picard to be good. I wanted it to be really good. As soon as the first trailer dropped, you were criticizing it. Yes, I was. Everything from Picard living in his old French wine vineyards, to the possible story, to the Borg, and everything. That, without having seen one episode. So if you are so bent on not liking something, what good is your opinion anyway? That being said, hopefully someday you will have a good time watching Star Trek again. Luke Beckett. Well, Luke, I do have a good time watching Star Trek. I watch Star Trek a lot. I've been revisiting Voyager episodes again because I just don't know that show as well as I know Deep Space Nine or the original series or Next Generation. I read Star Trek books. I was talking about Star Trek books just yesterday. But here's the thing. I am a connoisseur of storytelling in general. And one of the great things about the age that we live in is there is a lot of great TV right now. I would dare say we've been living through another golden age of television. I first noticed it. We started seeing cable shows on HBO. And I think about how great some of the shows are. And just off the top of my head, Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, Chernobyl, True Detective Season 1. There is the caliber of television writing. The bar is very high. There's other shows like Fleabag or Broadchurch, British shows. There's so much great television being made in general. Diverse genres, The Boys, Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance. There's just so much really interesting and diverse programming being made these days that what I want a Star Trek show that reflects the kind of great writing that is going on all over the broadcast space, whether it's streaming or whether it's on cable. While I had problems with Watchmen, certainly it didn't lack ambition. And there's just a lot of really interesting things that are going on. The reason that I object so strenuously to modern Star Trek is I don't feel that modern Star Trek reaches the standards of what other shows are doing. I feel that the grasp of science fiction concepts in Star Trek is very cliche. We've now watched Discovery and Picard deal with synths or artificial life in, I feel, a very rudimentary, very basic, very cliche way. Science fiction has been showing us these things for a very, very long time. I often cite Metropolis, 1927. We've seen Galactica. We've now seen Westworld. Westworld debuts again tonight. And the idea of, they have dumbed down this idea, synthetic life is evil. And they haven't even defined what synthetic life really is. What does it mean? Have we delved into it? They haven't given us enough to even know. Like, okay, there's an ancient alien race, whether it's the Takan Empire or whether it's the Iconians. I saw a video pop up about it's the Iconians. Well, no, I would say the Takan Empire in the Next Generation episode, The Last Outpost, the first episode with the Ferengi, is more along the lines of what the Zatvash found. But there's so many questions. I feel that the world building on these shows is lacking. And as somebody that is a huge science fiction fan, a huge fantasy fan, a huge horror fan, who has been reading literary science fiction since I was a kid, I feel that the world building in this show doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I'm not coming at it from a Star Trek standpoint. I am coming at it from a writing standpoint. And I feel that modern Star Trek over the last 10 years, since 2009, has really let us down. Star Trek should be smarter and it should be better. Now, does that mean that you can't enjoy it? Look, I like a lot of trashy sci-fi. I love Battle Beyond the Stars when it's clearly a ripoff of Star Wars. Star Crash, another ripoff of Star Wars. I mean, I like a lot of things. I take enjoyment out of a lot of things that I would not say are the Tiffany standard. But here's the thing: Star Trek should be the gold standard. Picard as a story told over 10 episodes, this should be the gold standard of science fiction on TV. And it's not. It's not. And I feel that from a writing standpoint, I feel that even the name of the show, Star Trek Picard, we're seeing Picard. We don't even know really, aside from the fact that, well, I'm getting to go off on one adventure. But I don't feel that Picard as a character is going anywhere. He's kind of being pulled around on this. He has no agency other than he's now on this adventure, but he's not in charge. He's like a secondary character in his own show. And I think, like, they talk about Logan. The Logan as a film really delved into the characters of Logan and Professor X. That was always the focus of that movie. And I feel this show, I don't feel, look, I'm as susceptible as the next guy to seeing Deanna Troi and Riker and watching Picard and them interact. That was wonderful. I liked seeing that. But it had nothing to do really with the story being told. I would have thought that Picard would have gone to Deanna and Riker in the early episodes. I felt that really the storytelling has been very lackadaisical. And I'm not speaking necessarily from a Star Trek standpoint, but as somebody and yes, I am highly critical of the stories I read, especially genre stories, because they should be better. They should be better. The amount of money they're spending and the people that are writing the show, especially Michael Chabon, who I feel is very much disappointed in me, because considering I've loved his work, I've loved his prose writing, both his nonfiction and his fiction. And I don't necessarily think he was the greatest fit to write TV, much less Star Trek. And that's what's been frustrating. And I also feel that a lot of the inconsistencies, as many people have been pointing out, from the original TNG, you got to go back to TNG for the show, is maddening. And they've also shown me a world that I don't believe in. I feel like they've taken a lot of liberties with the whole world, the whole Star Trek universe, to fit this story they're trying to tell. And when I hear that they get to episode 7 and they realize their story wasn't working and they had to go reshoot and create episodes to sort of fill in these blanks, I'm like, what? Why is that? How is that? I mean, basically we're getting... When I think back to the TV shows, like, I see Picard as a miniseries. And like the miniseries of yore that I loved, Shogun, The Winds of War. These are some of the things that showed me the possibilities of what TV can do. Well, Picard should be at least at that level. The amount of money they're spending on this show, they should have had these scripts. They should have been ironclad before they started shooting them. They shouldn't get to episode 7 and have problems with their narrative. Space Legolas should not be sitting in the same hallway fighting the same Romulans. That scene should have taken place over one episode and over and done, and we should have moved on. Why was this character even introduced? He has nothing. He's not even with Picard's quest anymore. So why is he there? Why are we going back to the Borg cube at all? I mean, I know I can guess, but I think they've done not a very good job with their narrative. And you can like it. People want to like Star Trek. I have a good friend that she likes to watch Star Trek as comfort food. And this was supposedly going to comfort her in that way. Well, has it? I mean, I feel for me it has not. I feel that I have not been given a great story from Picard, and that bothers me. But I don't ever want to prevent anybody else from liking those kinds of stories. I'm not here to do that. And if you like these stories, you should like them with all your heart and never apologize for what it is that you like. And I certainly don't want to take it away from you. This next letter comes from Clint Stutz. Rob, I've been a fan of Star Trek and sci-fi in general since I was about 8 years old. My mom and dad introduced me to the original series at the time, and my dad also had a collection of the Star Trek Reader in hardback on his bookshelf, those were the Blish stories, the Blish books combined into like a Reader's Digest version. In hardback on his bookshelf, which I consumed when my reading comprehension was up to the task. In later years, when I was working my way through college, my shift ended at 11 p.m. and I'd get home just before 11:35 p.m., right as the news ended and a TNG rerun started. We'd watch that together religiously every night during the week, and it didn't matter how many times we'd seen the episode. We loved the characters, and we loved the stories told in the wonderful world in which the characters existed. Fast forward to today. I'm 42 years old now. And Star Trek has not aged as well as I have. I've watched both seasons of Discovery, and I'm watching Picard weekly. Riker had just been stabbed through the chest on a planet called Imprima, and Chapter 10 contains some character reactions to that news. As Dr. Crusher prepared to beam down to save Riker's life, I thought this was a bit noteworthy. Her last shipboard sight was that of Worf, his body unnaturally rigid as he resisted the impulse to leap onto the platform beside her. His eyes flashed back fire, and she had no trouble understanding their message. Do not let him die. Even though I knew Riker would live, I felt what Worf felt. I felt because I had these characters in my head. The problem with modern Star Trek is that I don't give a crap about any of the characters, and I don't want them in my head. They could all die in a horrible warp core breach on their next episode, and I wouldn't blink an eye. If CBS pulled the plug on both shows immediately, I'd be fine with it. Part of the reason for that sentiment is the lack of character development. The most unintentionally funny moment of Discovery Season 2 was when everybody on the bridge introduced themselves to Pike. That wasn't so much for Pike as it was for the audience, because we don't know or care who they are. We've got all the way to Season 2 and we still didn't really know their names. So yes, there's very little character development, but that's not the full scope of the problem. The rest of it is this. I don't like the world in which they exist. Growing up watching and reading Star Trek, I wanted to be in their world and work side by side with those characters in that world. It was prime escapism, and I loved it. I still do. When it comes to Discovery and Picard, I want nothing to do with that world, and I don't even want to be associated with the characters in it. Not even Picard, since he's not really Picard. He's just an old man with the name Picard who gets crapped on in virtually every episode. Watching Discovery and Picard is not escapism. It's stressful. It's stressful because it's not unlike the world I live in daily, populated with people I just rather not be around. So why do I watch these shows? I honestly don't know. It's not like I look forward to it. I tend to dread it. Perhaps I just can't give up hope that Trek will feel like Trek again. It's my hope that Star Trek will one day end up in the hands of someone who understands and respects it, and who will once again provide us with a world which we desire to escape into. Thanks for your time, Clint S. I have to tell you, Clint, man, you're not wrong, dude. You are not wrong. I am with you 100% about this. I mean, I spent so much of my youth daydreaming about living in the Star Trek universe and working and performing and being around these people. Because you're right. This Star Trek story, I'm sure in the end, in the last 2 episodes, they'll have some kind of attempt at maybe sticking the landing. But, you know, already Mars is on fire, thousands and thousands of people who've died. We've watched in every episode, literally people get murdered or killing themselves. It was very interesting to me that the choices that they've made with these episodes. And look, as the inconsistencies have been pointed out about the timeline and how Starfleet, I mean, Starfleet just comes off, I hate Starfleet. I hate Starfleet. And sure, our admiral said, "Oh, we're already sending ships." It doesn't matter. You've made me hate Starfleet. You've made me hate the Star Trek universe. And what they've done is, in order to make the show more relatable to today with Brexit and Trump or whatever they've been saying, They've made the Star Trek universe, they've bent the Star Trek universe to what the story is they wanted to tell. And the story they wanted to tell isn't that smart. It's cliche and obvious and didactic. And it's not worthy of Star Trek in my own mind. Now, some people are enjoying it because they don't look at things. I get it. You know, you can sit down the way I look at Star Crash. There's a lot of people that would say to me, how can you like that tripe? Well, I mean, I look at Star Crash and I think, because the people who made this movie, as goofy as it is, the love is part of every frame of the film. And when I saw it when I was younger, even when I recognized the model, I could recognize the parts from other models that were on the spaceship models they built for Star Crash. And it just, even when I watched as a kid, I'm like, these people had so much fun making this movie. Luigi Cozzi had so much fun making this movie. And I could see the love they brought to it. And that's why I was able to enjoy it for its own sake. With Picard, I feel the way it was made, how it was made, the story they're telling is deeply, deeply cynical. And I find nothing uplifting about it. And I just don't buy any of it. And I feel like you feel. Let's see. There's a couple people that, hang on, let me go back to this. A Dancing Dog sends in a tip and says, Robert, in my opinion, Star Trek the Motion Picture is visually the most stunning Star Trek movie ever. Sure, it was a troubled production, but there's no questioning that the film looks absolutely stunning and is a majestic production. I completely agree. Star Trek the Motion Picture is my favorite Star Trek movie because what it did for the very first time was expand the scope of the Star Trek universe the way I had imagined it to be. You know, when I was reading Star Trek novels and playing with my Mego action figures before Star Trek the Motion Picture had come out, reading my photo novels, my blueprints, in my mind, the Star Trek universe was much more expansive than we'd ever seen. And the Star Trek the Motion Picture gave me, look, we'd never seen Earth in the 23rd century. And when Earth is revealed in the 23rd century in Star Trek the Motion Picture with the rousing Goldsmith score, I mean, it crashes. And you see the shot of San Francisco, and you see the shot of the retrofitted Golden Gate Bridge with like anti-grav lifts or whatever's going on there. It was just so majestic and so exciting. And seeing Kirk arrive, I mean, that arrival was majestic and great. And I loved everything about it. And what's interesting, you know, people superficially, you could say that, okay, the plot of Star Trek the Motion Picture does in fact resemble The Changeling in that you had a probe that we shot out into space returning back to us. In the case of The Changeling, one of our probes crashed into an alien probe, but that didn't really bother me because what it was exploring was a little bit different. The storyline was a little bit different. But yes, it was majestic and it was big. And ultimately, Star Trek the Motion Picture, for all of its doom and gloom, and it's there, is very uplifting. You know, it's a very uplifting thing. And when you see Spock take Kirk's hand, this simple feeling is beyond V'ger's comprehension. And you watch the director's cut, and Spock is shedding a tear. And Spock says, I weep for V'ger as I would a brother. I mean, there's so much in there that is Star Trekian. I mean, I love it. The problem with Picard and Discovery to me is it seems like they've looked at every other science fiction franchise. Look, you know what? Here's my overarching theory about what's happened to Star Trek and what they're trying to do. Star Trek isn't cool. They've tried to make it cool. But Star Trek was never going to be cool. Because with Star Trek 09, if you look at the way it's shot, the way it's acted, the way it's cast, they're desperately trying to make Star Trek cool again. Now, for someone like myself, as a child, I thought Star Trek was the coolest thing in the world. And Star Trek appeals to a certain group of people. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to make Star Trek appeal to a different group of people. And so they're trying to change it. They're literally, unbelievably so, they're trying to make it cool. Now, Battlestar Galactica was cool. I mean, it was hip and edgy. But Star Trek, what they're trying to do is force a square peg into a round hole. They're trying to make it modern and more relevant by appealing to audience members that Star Trek traditionally didn't appeal to. Now, I understand that from a corporate standpoint, that's smart. Let's try and broaden your Trek horizons. But what Star Trek is at its essence is about people that are really good at their jobs. They're best at their jobs. That's why they're stationed on starships they're the best of the best. They're the smartest, and they're really good at doing their jobs. They're out there on the frontier because they've put in the time. And what I thought was really interesting was when you award Kirk command of a Federation flagship at the end of Star Trek '09, what you're saying is that somebody who didn't put in the time, somebody who was a hipster on academic probation that just got off of, basically bamboozled his way in, somebody who's not cool and not deserving got command of a starship. Well, people today, they don't want to hear that they have to work their asses off. They'd rather watch things. The idea of Star Trek is that the underlying idea that was never really spoken is that you had to be good at what you did. You had to be great at what you did. You had to be the best of the best. That's what Star Trek always was about. Star Trek '09 showed us you didn't have to be the best of the best. James Kirk, as portrayed by Chris Pine, was not the best. He was like the coolest guy. He was the guy you wanted to hang out with. He was literally like president of his fraternity. But they made him troubled or whatever. And I don't mean to say that being in a fraternity is bad, but they certainly weren't giving you the kind of people that you got in Star Trek. And I think the message there is Star Trek is elitist. And it made me, as a kid growing up, I was never going to be as smart or as good at my job as some of those people were depicted as being on Star Trek. There was nobody better at his job than Spock. And Dr. McCoy was probably the best at his job too, because he had that logic, and he had that empathy, and he had that humanity in addition to just being a great doctor. And Kirk was this combination of logic and empathy, and he needed Kirk and he needed McCoy. And see, the thing about here's another underlying thing that I really can't stand about modern Star Trek. Kirk doesn't need anyone else. They've never really shown us the camaraderie. They've never shown us the troika, because they had a mandate from the beginning. Well, you can't just make a movie about Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Let's throw Uhura into the mix because she's a black woman. And I understand what they were doing there. Let's give her a relationship with Spock. But what that did, it belittled both having Spock and Uhura in a relationship the way it was portrayed on that show during the Kelvin timeline. It diminished both Uhura's character and Spock's character to try and make it more appealing to people that want to let's have a relationship. That's fine if you want to depict a relationship as an adult relationship. Their relationship was depicted at maybe the junior high school level at best, watching them argue when they're on an away mission, and let their relationship interfere with their job. This is not Star Trek. This is trying to appeal to people, and what you're doing is you're diminishing the franchise as a whole. At least that's the way I saw it. And I hated it. Star Trek is about the best of the best. And nobody wants to hear that anymore. Nobody wants to hear the best of the best because nobody wants to put in the work anymore. Everybody wants to believe that they're special. You're not fucking special. You know who are special? Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Because they work their asses off to be special. And what modern Star Trek is doing, and what's even more interesting, is now you've taken a character like Michael Burnham, who can apparently do anything, and she's the center of the entire universe, and they've moved away from the ensemble nature of what Star Trek is. And there's just a lot of things about it that I don't dig. Dancing Dog says, as Jerry Goldsmith's powerful emotional score is, in my opinion, the best score a Star Trek feature film has ever had. Oh, by far. The score for Star Trek The Motion Picture is not just one of the great Star Trek scores. It's one of the great film scores. It's certainly one of the great science fiction scores. Jerry Goldsmith's his scores, he's not John Williams. But I would dare say, as far as a man who scored science fiction movies, I think about his scores for Planet of the Apes. I think about his score for Alien, and a lot of Alien I know was recycled. They use other pieces of music. But Capricorn 1, Jerry Goldsmith, man, that guy could crush. But his Star Trek scores, and his score for Star Trek 5, also terrific, makes use of a lot of the same themes. But the Star Trek The Motion Picture score, is incredible. And they were scoring that movie 2 weeks before it was in theaters. Crazy. I understand why Harve Bennett had to keep the budgets low, but that first film, oh my, beautiful. It is beautiful. And remember, I've said this so many times before, but the $44 million, the budget of Star Trek The Motion Picture is often quoted as having, that money was not all spent. They had to wrap up the development costs of the previous Star Trek feature film Planet of the Titans that didn't get made, and the aborted Star Trek Phase 2 television series. There was a lot of money spent on both of those in development. They were building sets. They were doing camera tests for the Star Trek Phase 2 series. They had commissioned 13 scripts to be written. So, yeah, they folded those in. But, yes, I think Star Trek The Motion Picture was I love it. I love Star Trek The Motion Picture, and I think it's an incredible film. Claude Hibbert sent in a super chat and said, "Gentlemen, let's broaden our minds, Lawrence." Rob, familiar enough isn't a good standard for franchises like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, or Star Trek. I agree. Star Trek should be the smartest and the most thoughtful and the most interesting of all of our science fiction franchises. Now, I hate to say it, but I find The Expanse is better. To me, The Expanse, if you want to look at where Star Trek should be, The Expanse, you've got a great, interesting core group of people that also, there's a show where inclusion is done in a very interesting way. I mean, if you look at, that has a very interesting group of people, and it makes sense as humanity, as people become, as we travel more, as we go out into the stars, you're going to see people intermixing. You're going to see all kinds of different kinds of people. I like the fact that there's a lot of different ethnicities going on in The Expanse, but the story, there's a sense of wonder to The Expanse about finding out what's going on with the proto-matter, and there's interesting politics going on, and ultimately, there is a sense of positivity to The Expanse that I feel is just paid lip service to in Star Trek. Michael Burnham will give a speech. See, it's uplifting. Picard will use the word optimistic in one episode. See, it's optimistic. But their storylines, I mean, the amount of killing alone in Picard, normally I don't mind that, but every episode has literally wallowed in its violence and its edgy subject matter. Let's watch some woman bash her own head in with a rock. Let's do a POV shot of her bashing her own head in. Anyway, but I feel like, familiar enough, you're absolutely right, Claude. Our franchises deserve people that love the franchises and understand the franchises. We have to do better. But it's just true of everything now. I feel like discourse in general has disintegrated. It's all tribalism. And when if you're a production company, you get to take over a franchise. Bad Robot had the Kelvin movies made. They had 10 years. Well, not quite 10 years, less than 10 years. But, I mean, Secret Hideout is just an adjunct of what happened with Bad Robot. So since 2009, Star Trek has been made by the same people. And I feel that it just hasn't been as good as it should be. Atticatch sends in a tip and says, there are old foreign sci-fi film. Are there other foreign sci-fi films that tickle your Ghibli? Some of my favorites are Wild Wild Planet, War of the Robots, Planet of the Vampires, and The Green Slime. Slime, surprisingly, was not Italian directed. No, it was Japanese. Toshiak Tsushima. Well, as many of you know, I've talked about Wild Wild Planet incessantly on this show. It's 1965. It's a Franco-Italian co-production. If you do not know Wild Wild Planet, what are you waiting for? Go find that shit right now, son. Warner Premiere has it available on DVD. I wish they would do a restoration and put it out on HD. Also, Warner Premiere recently put out The Green Slime in HD. I love The Green Slime. All the War of the Robots, Mario Bava's Planet of the Vampires, another movie that looks great. MGM did a great restoration of Planet of the Vampires. You got to get that. It's a must-own. I love Planet of the Vampires. I'm a huge Mario Bava movie fan. But get that. All of those movies that you mentioned, Atticatch, are great and worth seeing. 100%. Claude Hibbert sent in a super chat and said, if you have no interest in the military, science, technology, space exploration, problem solving, and team-centered dramas, then Picard is awesome. Yeah, I mean, I find it, the character of Raffi, really, I mean, you have a woman of color who's a single mom who lives in a trailer who's addicted to drugs. I mean, this is an after-school special 30 years ago. And literally smoking and all this. What is the 24th century equivalent of if you're going to show a character, if you want to really be edgy, what about people that microdose LSD? You hear about that in the tech sector. A cursory glance of how people are using drugs these days is far more interesting than what we're seeing. I mean, she's literally vaping. I mean, come on now. Can't you come up with something more interesting than that? The idea that why not come out with like something interesting. Drugs are bad. Jenny, eat something if you love swingers. I mean, it's like, why not show something more interesting? Like somebody has developed a dependency on some kind of drug that they're not going to kick the habit and they need it, but the drug actually makes their performance better. That would be a more interesting look at drugs. They're even the way they present drugs and addiction is from a 77 after school special. It's not interesting. Why not come out on the other end to the point where Raffi is using drugs and has to have drugs in order to be any good? Do something interesting, something unique, something we haven't seen before. That's what I want to see. That's what I want to see from Star Trek. I want to see, like, there's no future in Star Trek Picard. They're not looking at the future in an interesting way. And I think that's really interesting. I mean, not interesting. They're showing us synths like, wow, boy, what an edgy subject. They're not presenting synths in any other different way that we haven't seen a million times before in movies. I mean, it's like, oops, artificial life. There's a secret race out there, and when you reach a threshold, they're going to come visit you and tell you it's bad. Why is artificial life bad? Why? There was an uprising that was started by the Romulans. But why is artificial life bad? I would dare say, if I had made Picard, and just the framework of Picard, I would have said that there's a lot of people that have given up their corporeal existence for immortal. By the way, we already saw this in Star Trek back in the 60s, in the first season of Star Trek. You could give up your body for an immortal android body. We saw that in What Are Little Girls Made Of? What if instead of creating synthetic life, what if human beings had given up their corporeal existence to become these androids? And what if you could live forever? Maybe that's the kind of thing that became dangerous. But no, their idea of synths on this show is so rudimentary. It's the way a 7th grader might write a story. They haven't dealt with synthetic life. They've made them this threat. They've even said that, okay, Soji is synthetic life. What, she has her own home planet now? Did all these synths like moved somewhere? Were they relocated? Like, what are they? We don't even know. It's so dumb. I hate it. Anyway, Alan Bennett sent in a letter. Alan Bennett says, hey, Rob, first, thank you for reading my letter about AI. Your topic, because everything comes back to Trek, as my girlfriend remarks to me. You have a wise girlfriend. You should keep her. Tell her I said so. Chimed in while I was working on my comic book graphic novel, and I had to take a pause just from the fact that it got read. I gotta say, wow. Thank you. Anyway, as I'm hearing about the breakdown of the latest Picard episode from both you and Gary over at Nerdrotic, I have a fuller picture of what the episode is looking like. Once again, those beloved androids, not synthetics, because that is the title reserved for Bishop from Aliens, are being brought up in conversation. And again, AI is bad. It is just so ridiculous to hear. It's like everything that Melinda Snodgrass set up for Data in the Next Generation just got tossed out from the car like some proverbial can of used Coke out the window. It tasted great, but what if we did this? I do indeed remember the episode of The Last Outpost and the portal of the Takan Empire. But if your hypothesis was true, why wouldn't Portal respond to Data as a synthetic being along with the away team? I don't know. Not as I'm going to nitpick Trek. Again, I will say that I like the way you think about the speculation of including the Next Generation episode, but everything that abounds with this production company continues to keep dismissing the past canon as something that you can't seem to navigate through or even around. I find this to be lazy storytelling because I found many more talented writers in comic books. Just look at how you might think a story arc is completed. But to find new ways of retelling pre-existing stories within canon and still tell an original story, that's the key. I would refer to Marvel's Avengers Forever storyline by both Kurt Busiek and Roger Stern. Or Busiek. Canon is not a burden, it's a strength. Alan, I couldn't agree with you more. See, here's the thing. What I find annoying, or what's so frustrating about this show is these writers, before they started, and I don't know how much of this they did, they needed to sit down and first and foremost define their universe. I think if they did that, they could have spent weeks doing this. I have to say that I have never worked in a television writer's room. I've not worked in a television writer's room. I did get the results of what the writers were coming up with on Femme Fatales, but Femme Fatales was an anthology show, and it was episodic, so there was a vague shared universe, sort of loose. I mean, it did, but I was dealing with scripts. That was the only time I ever dealt with TV. I directed 5 episodes of Femme Fatales. I have been given, because of this Netflix project that I'm admittedly doing a small amount of work on. But what's really cool about this Netflix project that I'm working on is I am included. I can read all of the scripts that are being developed. I can read all the notes. I'm seeing how this show has been developed from the inside out. And then I get to see what my piece of it is working on these things later down in the process. But I'm watching a TV show being developed, and kind of like I saw when I was on set with my video camera watching a movie getting made, and I could talk to anybody. I get to watch how a TV show is developed, and I've been very impressed with how the people that are making this particular show that I'm working on have developed this show. It is rich and deep in mythology, and there's a lot of questions, and I've been able to literally participate on an episode-by-episode basis, and so I've been seeing how it has developed and how it's been how it's been thought of, and I'm dealing directly with the person that's highest up, the person that created the show. And it's been very interesting to see. I've been given again, my career has been frustrating to the extent that a lot of the projects I work on, all this knowledge that I've been amassing, I haven't been able to utilize the way I would like to. But I've learned more about television and television development and writing in this particular process, because it's going to be on Netflix, than I would have ever thought possible. So I have learned a lot about how this writing works, and it's been a fascinating experience, which is why it doesn't. I guess I just don't understand why Star Trek, Picard, and Discovery haven't seemed to beat all this stuff out, and that's the questions that I have of how the shows. And I think a lot of them could have been alleviated. I do. But again, and by the way, I'm just going through the letters that I've been sending. I didn't just pick Star Trek letters, ladies and gentlemen. I didn't just do that. This next letter is from Bob Kowal. Kowal. The Capra Effect. Mr. B, there is a movie element I've come to make note of. In a fit of ego, I've given the element a name. The Capra Effect. As you may have guessed, the Capra Effect is named after the immortal director Frank Capra. For me, this refers to his seeming magical ability to have the viewer engaged in a character in a matter of moments. It could be a newsboy hawking a paper. It could be a miserly banker perusing a ledger. Good or bad, in short order, we have a real sense of these characters. We feel we understand how they see the world, and they feel human. We tend to like or dislike them right away. Other directors of the time pulled this off well, but for me, it seems to be a signature element of Capra's films. The effect is encapsulated in a moment of It's a Wonderful Life. While being observed by angels, George Bailey is frozen mid-sentence, waxing about prospective adventures. Clarence declares, "I like George Bailey. He has a nice face." And we all like George as well. In contrast, there are countless films and TV series that expose us to characters for hours and hours without giving us much a sense of who they are. We know how they behave and what they say, but we don't know who they are. We have no sense of their humanity. What is behind this Capra effect? I'm not sure there's a definitive answer, but we know it, or at least sense it, when we experience it. Writing probably plays a part, but Norman Rockwell, as well as other painters, captured the Capra effect in his paintings. We see a kid with his dog heading to the fishing hole. Without a word, the kid is presented in such a manner that we instantly feel that we know and like him. Is it a dated effect? Is it from a film style of a bygone era, as the Rockwell painting is? Alex DeLarge's face in the opening moments of A Clockwork Orange would suggest otherwise. Anne Bancroft's brief portrayal as the stage star Madge Kendall in The Elephant Man creates arguably the most magic, uplifting 5 minutes of film ever to grace a screen. 300 seconds of Madge Kendall is a masterful and essential counterpoint to all of the instantly deplorable denizens that occupy much of the rest of that film. The Coen brothers seem to capture the Capra effect quite often. Think about the characters in Fargo. We clearly remember all of them, whether it's the perfectly pragmatic policewoman Marge, the ditzy ponytailed prostitutes, or the stone-faced corpse-grinding kidnapper. We have a fairly full sense of who these people are regardless of their screen time or the amount of dialogue. Have directors such as Kubrick, David Lynch, and the Coen brothers been that directly influenced by Capra? Well, Capra might have some kind of effect on most directors that have followed. In the case of Lynch and the Coen brothers, with further viewings, Capra's influence seems more and more evident. As I mentioned, I can't quite put my finger on what creates the Capra effect on film. Is it the creator's astute sense of human nature? I attribute this to many great painters and Rockwell. Is it the writing, the casting, the particular camera technique? It is likely some alchemical or alchemical combination of all of these elements. In that sense, the Capra effect might not be more than an emblematic trait of filmmaker who has truly mastered their craft. Whatever the case, I would wager that if you notice the Capra effect, whatever you are watching will be worthwhile. Regards, Bob Cole, a.k.a. Atticatch. Oh, that's interesting, Bob. Well, there you go. First of all, what a great letter. I want to thank you for this letter. I think you're absolutely spot on. But I think what really the Capra effect is, first of all, one of the things that I've noticed in modern movies, and indeed in Star Trek, there's a lot of shortcuts to things that are going on. And I think a lot of this, when you look at older movies, a lot of movies, the screenplays were very theatrical in nature because people were coming out of the theater. And so in the theater, you have to be able to let an audience know exactly who a character is right when they come on stage. There's no time to develop them, and you certainly don't have the visual language of cinema. So I think what's really important is, and I think a lot of this has been lost, is detail. The Capra effect is what Capra does, I think what you're responding to, and same with Norman Rockwell. If you look at a Norman Rockwell painting, it's all about the details. And he won't just show you a boy going to a fishing hole, walking to a fishing hole. Every single detail, whether it's his shoes or whether he's barefoot, it's not just the fishing rod he has, it's the kind of fishing rod he has. Every single detail in a Norman Rockwell painting, in his images, his tableaus, every single detail adds to the overall feel of the image. And that same thing should be true of how people talk to each other. You know, I've read so many screenplays, and I think that the best screenplays, there's never dialogue that's perfunctory. You know, and also even screen direction. When I've told people, and I've never taught screenwriting, and again, I've only written 3 screenplays in my life, one of which was produced, one of which was almost produced, and one that was optioned and had good coverage. I'd still like to make it. But one of the things I've told people, because I've read a lot of scripts, I've read a lot of friends' scripts, and I'm like, it's all about detail. When a character, if say you're writing about a character named Fred, you shouldn't just say Fred walks into the room. Fred walks into the kitchen. Well, you have to tell me, how does Fred walk into the kitchen? Does Fred bound into the kitchen? Does Fred traipse? Does he reluctantly traipse into the kitchen? I mean, the more detail that you have in writing, the more evocative. What a screenplay does for anyone, and I guess what a book does too, but what a screenplay should do is evoke visual imagery, because cinema is, after all, visual imagery. So you don't need to put screen direction. I can't stand when people put screen direction in scripts, because that's for the director to decide. What you have to do as a director is be evocative, be as evocative as you can with your imagery. And that goes for screen direction, and it goes for dialogue. And I think I always go back to one of my first favorite movie was War of the Worlds, and thank God it's finally coming out on Blu-ray. This new Australian company, love them, support them, and now I'm forgetting their name. I can't believe it, but I already pre-ordered War of the Worlds. But there's a scene at the beginning of War of the Worlds where Clayton Forrester is up in the woods, and basically after the first meteor crashes, they need to come get him. And there's a sheriff, and he's kind of a good old boy sheriff, and he comes in, and there's a bucket of fried chicken, like Kentucky Fried Chicken or something, and the sheriff has gone to get Clayton Forrester, and he does this double take, and he reaches down and he grabs the fried chicken and eats it. Well, they didn't have to do that. That was just an extra added bit of detail, and it tells you a lot about the character. Not just because he's got more of a southern drawl, but because he does this. He feels like he can do that. And in a way, it kind of makes you like the character more. He could have just been a stock sheriff that his only function is to come get Clayton Forrester. We don't see him later on in the movie, really. There's nothing, but for that moment of screen time that he's on, that you wanted him to leave an indelible impression. And the reason people love movies is because they are full of characters, and the storylines are full of characters and details that make those stories memorable. Just do a Google search. Do a cursory Google search. If you don't really know what I'm saying, and maybe you don't know who Norman Rockwell is, just do a cursory Google search, Norman Rockwell paintings, and see if I'm not right. Every element in one of those paintings is painstakingly rendered with detail, with personality, animate and inanimate objects. There's so much detail that in one picture, you get a whole slew of emotions, a whole slew of feeling. You'll look at any of Norman Rockwell's, Americana. He captures the American spirit. What he does is he mythologizes America in each one of his images, a single image. And that's amazing. And that's, it's an amazing thing. So I think Frank Capra did the same kind of thing. Elizabeth was painting around Christmas time. She was painting outside, out in the family room, and she was watching It's a Wonderful Life. And, I've seen It's a Wonderful Life a lot. I see it not just as a Christmas movie. It really is one of the great fantasy movies ever made. It doesn't just have to be at Christmas, because the story that it has to tell, while it's a great Christmas story, is also a story everybody needs to hear. And it's truly a great, great, great fantasy story. But again, the details, even the way people speak, the looks on their faces. I mean, it's the more detail, it's a great thing. And when I say detail, it's not just visual detail. It's emotional detail. It's character detail. It's the detail in the dialogue. How do you say those lines? Amazing. So, and I think all of the great directors know that, and that's why, whether it's David Fincher or Stanley Kubrick, these taskmasters, or you get a director like Frank Capra, and there's just a lot of that. It's all about the detail. Let's see. Oh, wait, wait, there's a lot more. I've been talking a lot here. Sean Pullen sent a super chat and said, when Campia tweeted his love for Picard, his timeline filled with "You Gotta Talk with Rob" comments. Any plans to do so on your show or his? Well, look, John, I've tried to say this to people before. John watches Star Trek in a very different way than I do. I mean, I'm bringing 50 years of not quite 50 years, but 45 years or 47 years of obsession about Star Trek to it. Reading the books, reading the comics, watching the episodes a million times, working on documentaries, being a paid Star Trek consultant, working on Star Trek fan films. Star Trek has definitely been a big part of my life. John does not think about Star Trek the way I do, and John likes Picard because he's enjoying it for its own sake, which I think is great. But I think if he and I were to argue about it, or we were going to debate about it, ultimately, I'm never going to convince John of my opinion, because my opinion is coming from a different place. The great thing about where John's coming from is he's able to enjoy it more than I am, because he doesn't carry around the Star Trek baggage I carry around. Now, I mean, I could also say to John, I mean, that's why I'm able to enjoy other things. I'm not a huge Harry Potter fan. I mean, I was actually not a fan of the first Harry Potter movie. I thought it was a movie about magic that wasn't a magical movie, if that makes sense. But I don't know if we'd ever get along. BL Alley tips and says, Rob, I apologize for any offense I've committed toward you. You don't have to apologize. Between failing health and lost skills, I experience frequent mood swings and sometimes express myself poorly. Never stop demanding quality storytelling for Trek and beyond. Well, BL, you've been here for a long time. BL has written a number of books as well. And I actually have one. I found one of your books. I thought you asked me to destroy it because of the cover. I did not. I don't know where it is right now, because it's right over there somewhere, but I have it. But I appreciate that, man. You don't look. People come and go, and it's nice. You're still here. You know, you're back here. You're participating in the chats, which I thank you for. I mean, look, I've always been a person that has given a lot of leeway to anybody that look, because I look at it this way, man. I am not my brother's keeper, but I do like people, and I in a way, I've had a lot of friends. I've even had a friend of mine who has passed away. My friend Sean used to say that I was like the island of misfit toys. If there was ever somebody who had problems or was a misfit toy, they could come to my island and hang out. And he would say that, and he would try and be disparaging. I'm like, that's the best thing you could ever say to me, because, you know, I like people. And throughout my own life, you know, I've met all kinds of different kinds of people, and I love people. I haven't always been afforded that courtesy, but I've had a lot of great people in my life that have supported me, that have helped me, that have shown me a lot of courtesy, and I've been very thankful for that. And I think that, you know, look, it's better to have all the different kinds of people around on the world than not. So it's great that you're here, BL, and, you know, don't worry about it. You don't have to apologize to me. Having you here and you're participating in the chat, you're talking to people, that's what the Post-Geek Singularity Imagination Connoisseurs are all about. You know, I'm going to say shit that pisses people off all the time. I mean, there's people that come after me and they get mad, and you know, but I hope we can all come back here and talk about it. Dancing Dog sends in another tip and says, Robert, what is your take on one of my favorites, Tobe Hooper's amazing Life Force, the film that practically bankrupt canon films, a beautiful naked woman walking through the movie, nice special effects by John Dykstra, score by Henry Mancini with Patrick Stewart. By the way, interesting tidbit, Patrick Stewart's first on-screen kiss was in Life Force, and it was with a dude. That's true, ladies and gentlemen. Dancing Dog, I love Life Force. Is Life Force a great movie? Probably not, but I love it. Now, if you get the international version of Life Force, which is on the Scream Factory Blu-ray, it's like 30 minutes longer. It has different opening credits. And look, is Life Force, does it have stilted performances? Is it all over the map? Some of the effects are really good. Some are like a little dodgy. Is it crazy? Does it have Matilda May literally gratuitously nude through the whole movie? Which, yes, it does. And good on the movie for doing that, because has there ever been a more perfect set of breasts than on Matilda May in Life Force? I don't know. Maybe Jennifer Connelly in The Hot Spot, but there's, you know, it's great. I love Life Force. Life Force, you know, I like Life Force because even like you said, the Henry Mancini score is really good. Dun 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 dun. It's got one of the great themes. I love Life Force. I unapologetically love Life Force. It is so much fun to watch. It's both serious and goofy, and it doesn't make much sense at all, but I do love it. And it was so great to get the Blu-ray with the international version on it. I used to have a Japanese Laserdisc of Life Force before it was available in America. And yes, it did almost bankrupt canon, but it's such a delightfully weird, goofy movie that has so many different things in it. It's got zombies in it, undead space vampires. I mean, honestly, I think that they should go back and remake the original novel that Life Force was based on is literally called Space Vampires. I have it here somewhere around here. And yes, it is. They can remake it. They should totally remake Life Force. You know, Mark Altman, my compatriot, tried to get it made. He had like the rights. He was going to do certain MGM titles and was going to go do Life Force, but as a really low budget movie. I don't know if he still has the rights, but I'd love to see Life Force get made. Anonymous sends in a tip and says, Picard and Discovery don't include cautionary tales, in my opinion. I miss it so much, it gives me phantom pains. No, they don't, even though I think Picard and Discovery stand as cautionary tales themselves of what not to do with venerable Star Trek, or the Star Trek franchise, or any franchise that's been around for a long period of time. Elizabeth Bell, my own Elizabeth Bell, sends in a super chat. Yo, the Richard would like to remind you to promote our new show and also the Facebook watch parties the night before. Elizaviews whining about movies. Well, I was going to get to that, but okay, since I'll do it now, since I do what Elizabeth tells me to do. We do have a new show. Elizabeth and I started a new show whining about movies. We did our first show about David Cronenberg's Crash, where we sit here and talk. And I know I don't have a mixing board, so the sound, our sound levels are going to be off. We really should have two microphones here, and I apologize that I don't. I need a mixing board to have two microphones. But we will make do. But we will be doing another Whining About Movies on Monday at 8 o'clock. And our movie this week is with the great Richard E. Grant. It is With Nail and I. With Nail, it's like with a nail, but it's With Nail and I, starring the American Doctor Who, Paul McGann, and of course, in a star-making role, Richard E. Grant as With Nail. So With Nail and I, join us tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, and it will be happening. Dancing Dog sends in another tip. Also, I challenge the Imagine connoisseurs here to attempt to sit through the film Rat Finkaboo. And I challenge them to sit through it sober. That is all. That's tall order. Rat Finkaboo. Yeah, that's not like the kind of thing. I don't dig those kinds of cult movies, but I guess you have to see it. I haven't watched that in forever. I don't know if I could recommend it though. But since you're recommending it, I'll recommend it. What does everybody think of Rat Finkaboo? Check it out. Stubbles sends in a tip and says, New Trek is like a piece of styrofoam floating on the ocean. They should have created an iceberg where we can sense the rest of the world under the surface. The styrofoam looks okay if you don't examine it too closely. If you do, the illusion shatters. I like that. That's interesting. An iceberg has something underneath it, but styrofoam doesn't. I kind of like that. This letter comes from Kurt A. Kurt A says, Hi, Rob. I'm a longtime fan of your channel, but this is my first letter to you. Well, Kurt A., welcome. Thanks for writing a letter. I know you said you're very excited for the Eternals. Me too. I thought I'd write you this letter to express my admiration for all things Kirby. Who is Kirby? For those of you who don't know, Jack the King Kirby was a legendary American comic book artist and writer who created most of the iconic heroes and villains in the Marvel Comics universe. Well, yes, he did. And since you brought it up, check this out, man. Look at this monster tome. Here is Jack Kirby's Fourth World Omnibus. This thing, you could literally work out with this. But I love Jack Kirby. I love his sense of characters. If you get Jack Kirby, if you've seen Forbidden Planet and you know what the Krell Lab is in Forbidden Planet, that's like a Jack Kirby thing. The Krell Labs in Forbidden Planet, that's Jack Kirby. And this thing, man, this is heavy. Woo, this is heavy. But Jack Kirby, I am a huge fan of Jack Kirby. This omnibus, by the way, is amazing. His Fourth World, there's Jimmy Olsen in here, there's Mr. Miracle, there's Big Barda, there's, of course, Darkseid. I love Jack Kirby. And also, he did Commandy. As you can see, that omnibus is right next to it. And here is Commandy, the last boy on Earth. And on the look, there's a little Jack Kirby right there. How cool is that? I would recommend both of these. This especially. John Schnepp loved Commandy. These are great. I love Jack Kirby. Let me get back to your letter. Kirby created or co-created Black Panther, the Celestials, Darkseid, Doctor Doom, the Eternals, Fantastic Four, Groot, Galactus, Hulk, the Inhumans, Iron Man, Kang the Conqueror, Magneto, the New Gods, Red Skull, Silver Surfer, Thor, the X-Men, and countless more. The man was a genius. Stan Lee once described Kirby as the most creative person I've ever met. It is safe to say that without Jack Kirby, there would be no Marvel Comics, and without Marvel Comics, there would be no Marvel Cinematic Universe. Kevin Feige is also a big Jack Kirby fan. In April 2018, when Feige announced a film based upon the Eternals, most people probably had no idea who or what the Eternals were. It's easy to understand why, because the Eternals only ran 19 issues from 1976 to 1978. Here is the Eternals right here. And these are all the Eternals issues that Jack Kirby did. And interestingly enough, Neil Gaiman with John Romita Jr. came back and also did a version of the Eternals. So I'm a huge fan of the Eternals. So, yes, You're absolutely right. Hang on. Let me get back here. The man was a genius. Stanley once described Kirby as the most creative person I've ever met. It is safe to say, without Jack Kirby, there would be no Marvel Comics. And without Marvel Comics, there would be no Marvel Cinematic Universe. Kevin Feige is also a big Jack Kirby fan. In April 2018, already read this, the series backstory had a very alien space gods vibe, a la Eric Von Donigan's Chariots of the Gods. Absolutely. It's funny, people don't know much about Eric Von Donigan and the Chariots of the Gods. Really, Scott talked a lot about it on the Prometheus documentary that is on that Blu-ray that Charlie de Lauzirika made. By the way, apropos of nothing, whether you like Prometheus or not, Prometheus, the Blu-ray of Prometheus, my friend Charlie de Lauzirika, who is a master documentarian, created a 4.5-hour documentary on the making of Prometheus that's essential viewing. It's really, really fascinating. And Charlie's done such a good job over the years on other documentaries, but that Prometheus disc, I've watched that. Of all the special features I think I've ever watched, I might have watched that Prometheus documentary the most, because I want to kind of I watch it to think, what went wrong? What went wrong? I watch it, but yeah, check that out. But yes, the whole idea of Eric Von Donigan wrote this book called Chariots of the Gods, and about how aliens had visited Earth, and he uses different things like the pyramids and the lines at Nazca and all this other stuff, and creates that idea. So the Eternals, people don't know. When I was a kid, you mentioned Chariots of the Gods, everybody knew Eric Von Donigan and Chariots of the Gods, but it was a very 70s thing, I think. But now people are like, what? So yes, when he says the series had a backstory, very Aliens, Chariots of the Gods vibe, a la Eric Von Donigan's Chariots of the Gods, the Eternals are superpowered beings created by an even older and more powerful group of beings, the Celestials. Yes, there are the Eternals, and then there are the Deviants. The Celestials did create both. In ancient times, they were mistaken for gods or heroes, giving rise to many legends. It was a cool concept, and even though the comic book series was canceled after a short run, its characters and concepts were incorporated into the Marvel Universe canon and, by extension, the MCU. The Celestials have already been mentioned or seen in several MCU movies, including Thor: The Dark World, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Avengers: Infinity War, and Avengers: Endgame. It all comes down to execution, but Kevin Feige has proven himself more than capable of pulling off what should be a glorious Eternals movie and launching a whole new franchise. I think it will be awesome. Kurt, a.k.a. Bronze Age Slacker. Kurt, first of all, thank you for writing in, and thanks for your first letter. It's a great letter, and I was happy to give it visual aids. I hope that I'm really hoping I love the Eternals. It's one of the. I don't think I've been as excited. I mean, I was really excited for Infinity War and Endgame. I'm not gonna lie, and I was not disappointed. I loved those movies. I love watching them, but Eternals is something I really want to see. I hope they do it right, and Kevin Feige has talked about how it spans thousands of years, and I think they're really going to lay the groundwork of the history of the Marvel cosmic universe here, and I, for one, can't wait. Sam O'Neill says, I think you may have missed my super chat. Did I, Sam O'Neill? Did I miss your super chat? I might have. Hang on, let me go back. Sam O'Neill said, oh, I did miss your super chat. Hi, Rob. It's Monday morning in Brisbane, and I'm still dusty from Saturday night. Anyway, I'd like to get into Star Trek and give it a go. Where should I start? Well, Sam, there's only one place to start with Star Trek, and here it is. You have to start at the beginning. You have to start with not the fucking cage, all right? The cage, I understand, I get it. This cage is only canonical when you watch it in the context of the original series. You must watch the original series. You have to start, and you have to do it the way I'm going to tell you to do it. Whenever you go to a streaming service, it's wrong, okay? You have to start with the episode where No Man Has Gone Before. Usually it appears as the third episode. It was the third episode broadcast. Do not watch it third. You got to start out with Where No Man Has Gone Before and then jump back to the Man Trap and Charlie X. You got to do that. You got to watch Where No Man Has Gone Before. Start there. Don't watch The Cage, and don't watch Where No Man Has Gone Before as a third episode. Watch Where No Man Has Gone Before first, then watch The Man Trap. Then I think it's Charlie X. And let it go from there. Watch the entire first season of Star Trek. See how you like it. You might not like it. You've got it. If you've never seen Star Trek, you got to sample it from the beginning. So there you go. I'm sorry I missed your super chat. So there you go. And I'm glad that it's Monday morning there. How are things? Are you guys socially distancing yourself? What's it like? What's it like in Brisbane? Stub McShave sends in a super chat and says, what book or film would you most be upset if the dogs ate? Ooh, that's a good one. One of the dogs, I love my Toshin books. I have the Toshin book, the Napoleon, the Stanley Kubrick's, all of his research for Napoleon, his unmade film Napoleon. It's a huge. I would be bummed if my dogs ate that. I have the Toshin 2001 book. I would be bummed if the dogs ate that, or these actually, like this. This is one of my favorite things I own. This is the Toshin Stanley Kubrick Archives. Now you can get these books now, and these are the first versions that came out. These are the ones that Toshin first released. But like this one even comes with, well, you can't really see it, but it comes with a 65 millimeter film strip from 2000. Hang on, from 2001, and it also comes with a CD interview with Kubrick. I love these books. It's gonna fall out. I would hate it if Gilbert ate them. I love Toshin books. Elizabeth got me the Star Wars Archives. That's actually this one here. That would bum me out if something happened to them. So I still need to get the Almodovar version. I haven't got that. I think there's a Chaplin version, a Disney version, but I got the. I love those books. That they would upset me if they were to get eaten. I would be very bummed out by that. But I would forgive them. It's just stuff after all. Let's see. This next letter comes from Darren McKinnon. Hey, Mr. Burnett. In yesterday's episode 360, I believe, you mentioned you had a few letters these days. So here we go. I was getting stuffed. They were something. It was all bummed out. Something was happening, but that's why I want to read all these letters. A lot came in. I wrote to you back in January before the premiere of Star Trek Picard. In that letter, I voiced my fear that the show would be below my expectations, but hoped it would surpass them. Since that letter, I've watched the first 5 episodes of Picard, and that was it. After seeing Jean-Luc Picard dressed as a fancy pirate, Rios as a space pimp, and C7 kill Icheb, I simply had to get out. After watching the original series, the animated series, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, Discovery, 5 episodes of Picard, and 13 movies, I can't anymore. Starting with the JJ series of movies, moving into Discovery, and now with Picard, I've had enough. A mythology that has been such an important part of my life and who I am no longer has any meaning to me. At least that is, in its current incarnation. I have people tell me to snap out of it. Star Trek has changed to be more modern TV. TV isn't the way it used to be. Times change. I replied to a friend of mine that through the late 60s into the 70s, 80s, 90s, and aughts, real Star Trek was able to remain relevant, remain watchable, remain hopeful, remain enjoyable. It no longer is any of those things. No matter the problem, they sent the message that we could get over it. The things that people worried about in the 60s with the original series weren't the same as what we were worried about during Voyager in the 90s, yet the writers were able to adapt and write something relevant. I find Star Trek has lost its relevancy. Why am I watching this? The new Star Trek shows will not be rewatchable in 20, 30, 40, or 50 years as pre-2009 Star Trek still is. Star Trek transcended generations. Perhaps Star Trek didn't make people feel as if they could one day fly in a starship, but it sure as hell made me think that one day humanity would get its act together. These new shows do not. Well, humanity hasn't got its act together. They've fallen apart. And that is what makes modern-day Star Trek just like almost everything else on TV. It's nothing special. It's a show about people's feelings. Real Star Trek is about imagination and intellect. With imagination and intellect, you have no need for useless violence, killing, or cursing. And please, don't get me wrong, I have no problem with violence and cursing. I do have a problem for its use in Star Trek. I used to think that humanity would reach such a point that even cursing would be limited in the future. And even for a foul-mouthed guy like myself, that made me feel good. As I sit here and age, there are fewer and fewer things I find enjoyable in life. Most of my friends have moved on. They have families and other priorities, which is natural. I find myself alone most of the time. In recent years, there'd been a spark of hope that something positive was on the horizon with announcements of new Star Trek series. Somehow, watching Star Trek makes me feel less alone. And I was looking forward to these new series. Me too. I kind of did hope for the best, but expect the worst, and my expectations were met. Star Trek, real Star Trek, was able, and still is able, to remove me from the present day and my personal issues and problems on top of making me fleetingly forget about injustice and inequality in our society. New Star Trek makes me feel as if those things will never go away. So, after all that criticism, allow me to say something good about modern Star Trek. It makes everything that came before it somehow look even better. Mr. Burnett, I'd like to once again thank you for your commentary. As Q said in the last episode of The Next Generation in 1994, "Goodbye, Jean-Luc. I'm going to miss you. You had such potential. But then again, all good things must come to an end." I got chills reading that just now. I got a chill. Please take care, Darren. Well, Darren McKinnon, let me just tell you, you don't have to feel lonely, at least not when you go online, because you're always welcome here. You're an imagination connoisseur and welcome here with this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. I mean, right now in this chat, right now, there are 363 people. 363 people. All over 365 people. All over the world. That's mind-boggling to me. Now, I know people say, well, John Campea gets thousands of viewers every day. He does. But, for me, I mean, it's just me, doing this. And I started a little over a year ago. I think it's great. What's great is that there's a community of people here like you guys and gals and gentle beings and all kinds of people, however you identify, whatever you identify with, however you want to be. You can come here and, be yourself and chat and talk. Because after all, I am the Chancellor of Cheerfulness. Although I do like the Archduke of Banterbury. I don't remember. Somebody hung that on me, and I just remembered it today. The Archduke of Banterbury. Anyway, you're all welcome here. And I want to thank you for writing this letter. I really appreciate it. But, you made some really good points. Will Star Trek endure? I think that the problem with this, with modern Star Trek, is it's so of its time. It doesn't transcend. It's just it's like what happened to the Bond franchise in the 70s. The James Bond franchise pioneered a genre in the 60s. That's why we got Matt Helm movies and Our Man Flint movies and all these other movies. But in the 70s, Bond was chasing after other genres. Blaxploitation with Live and Let Die, martial arts movies with Man with the Golden Gun. That's what's happened to Star Trek. Star Trek is chasing trends instead of setting trends. And it's too bad. It's borrowing concepts from all of these other science fiction shows rather than creating its new concepts. I mean, it's strange. You watch Star Trek now and you're like, oh, it's like this, it's like this, it's like this, it's like this, it's like this. When Star Trek first came on the air, it wasn't like anything. I mean, it wasn't like anything media related, but yeah, it's too bad. But that was a pretty great letter you wrote. Thank you for that. This one comes in from Justin Kipper. Hey, Rob, longtime viewer. I just want to drop you a quick note about the Whining About Movies, Elizaviews #1. And thank you for it. Obviously, it's been a tough week with the pandemic and virtually all live entertainment being canceled. Nothing to be happy about, and almost all media is totally focused on the negative. Even YouTube creators I normally enjoy. But your new show, it reminded me that life goes on. There are still many blessings and reason to wake up with a smile. There are. And entertainment should reflect that when it can. By the time your extended wine and a beer episode ended, I felt better than I had all week. So did I. And isn't that the main reason that entertainment exists? Maybe that wasn't the initial plan for this debut, but somehow it morphed into this positive thing that was obviously infectious in the live chat. Thanks to you and Elizabeth. Keep it up. Her name's actually, it's not Eliza, it's Elizabeth. That's what I call look, Robservatory, Robserve and Report, being Robjective. It's supposed to be funny. You know, it's got to be that's got to be entertaining. I'm sure some people roll their eyes, and you know, part of calling the show Robservations is a statement that yes, I'm basically 12 years old still, maybe even younger, to think that was funny. But it is kind of funny. And if I'm going to do Robservations and we're going to do a spinoff, I think Elizaviews. Somebody actually said Elizabeth's nickname is Babette, and she said it on the show. And somebody came up with what did I say? I'm forgetting it now. But Babette's something. But it was interesting. But I think Elizaviews is fun. It goes with Robservations. It's goofy but funny, but it tells you what it is. And by the way, just because we're doing whining about movies, I want there to be an Elizaviews show where it's just Elizabeth, so you can get to know her. I'm sure she's cringing in terror if she's watching this right now going, no. But I think it would be pretty fun, wouldn't it? But Justin, I'm glad you liked the first show of whining about the movies. I mean, alcohol and movies, pretty much my favorite things. And with Elizabeth, my 3 favorite things in life: Elizabeth, movies, and alcohol. What's not to love? What's not to love about that? So there you go. But thank you for writing it. I appreciate that. And tomorrow should be fun. By the way, again, we're going to be watching With Nail and I from 1986 from Handmade Films, the company that was started by George Harrison of the Beatles. It was his film company. He made Time Bandits, amongst others. Luke Reichelt. Reichelt? It's either Reichelt or Reichelt. Reichelt. Greetings from Australia. Yes, we have Tom Hanks. If you want it back, appease our demands and return Star Trek to a place of respectability, or no Hanks. That's funny. You have 3 episodes to comply. Before we take more national treasures, Oprah maybe, you've been warned. Don't fuck around with Australians. We're a nation of criminals. Have a ripping good day. You should have seen a dick move like this coming from us. G'day. Now, how to return Star Trek to grace. I have suggestions. I grew up watching TNG and Deep Space Nine. They were a core part of my childhood and helped shape me. Any honorable characteristics I have were fostered by these shows, but were they fostered by fosters as well? I've spent my entire adult life in service to people with disability. Picard and Sisko and the crews taught me that valuing life is badass. I'm watching Deep Space Nine at the moment. It's superb. Like a warm, meaningful embrace after the public bathroom sex that is Picard. I watched 2 seasons of Discovery and I felt compelled to get checked for STDs at the doctor afterwards. I'm okay. The rash will go away. I've just got to stay away from season 3. Now, you know you're going to watch it just like me. You got to feel my pain. It's been pointed out, and I agree, that the philosophies of old Star Trek and new are different. Yes, new Star Trek is terrible, incoherent storytelling, but the biggest flaw for me is the philosophy. Old Star Trek has a reverence for the unknown, a Carl Sagan-esque wonder of the universe. It left you fascinated and inspired about the nature of humanity and the cosmos, about the possibilities of human potential. I fear for the children inspired by a new Star Trek. In 20 years, will someone be writing a letter to their internet friends saying, Star Trek changed my life? After watching a guy whose name I don't remember decapitate some other guy in that confusing scenario, I knew what I wanted to be as an adult. A psychopath. I'm so lucky I watched violent, nihilistic nonsense that made no sense. Inspiring. That's my thoughts on that. I collect pop vinyls and already built a pop vinyl museum in my house. It kicks ass. It's 270 degrees around the room going up to the ceiling. All sectioned out, animation, fantasy, sci-fi, etc. The crown jewels are a big fuck-off Millennium Falcon and a custom Bjork I had made. You had a custom Bjork pop made? That's dope. Why don't you send that picture into the Imagination Connoisseur Gallery on the website? I've ordered that 10-inch Indiana Jones that John Campia lorded over us recently. I've started making video tours of the museum. The first one is super random and mostly photos I've taken that I thought look cool. It's my first attempt at solo video making, so it's not perfect. I know, there are 50 aspect ratios here. I know. Here's a link. Well, I'm going to put this link into the live chat. And again, this letter will be up on the website. So here's the link to his... It's in the live chat. There you go. I'm currently working on video 2. The feedback I got was that it would be helpful if the videos had one aspect ratio, and I stuck to a theme. Well, remember, Christopher Nolan's movies don't have one aspect ratio. The Dark Knight Rises. I think Dunkirk maybe, but no, maybe it wasn't. They change aspect ratios. It's just how you change aspect ratios. I'm currently working on video 2. The feedback I got was that it would be helpful if the videos had one aspect ratio and stuck to a theme. So with this valuable feedback in mind, I've begun working on a sci-fi themed pop museum studio tour video with the Post-Geek Singularity in mind. It should be ready next week. Well, send it to me and I'll play it. I'll play it on the show. You put it up on YouTube too, but I'll actually play it on the show if you send it to me. I'm waiting on Starship Troopers bug that is essential to the collection. So I'm going to settle down, commit to one aspect ratio and one theme, and with this community as the target audience. That's it. Thank you, Rob. You're fucking hilarious. I love your work. For evidence of your comic brilliance, I'd refer people to your Schmodown match versus Tom Dagnito. So good. I get so mad when that young dude was rude to you on the live Schmodown stage recently as part of his shtick. What an idiot. He said it was part of his act, but you've got to be a bit of a dick to do that. It's okay. It's okay. It's all kayfabe. We love it. I guess that's the overall theme of my letter and why I connect with you. You honor what you love. Everyone should. Whatever that they love, that's what's sacred. Honor the sacred. Fuck the noise. Honor the sacred. Love, Luke. I love Australians. Luke, thanks for writing in. I really appreciate it. What a great letter. Thank you very much for that. It was great. Let's see. Let's jump back into this and see what you guys have had. Wow, I've been going for a long time. I don't know if you guys like hanging out here. There's 344 people here, so I'll still go on for a little while longer. I know my moderators are like, Jordy Lyons is like, Jordy Lyons just said that letter was funny as fuck too. Yes. Okay. Let's see. Sam O'Neill sends another super chat. I think you may have missed my super chat unless I completely missed it. If I did, sorry, Rob. Oh wait, I already did. I already checked that. Roberto Suarez says today's COVID-19 Post-Geek Singularity PSA. Canopy.com is a free movie service with many Indian foreign titles. Check with your local library to see if they partner with them. Canopy, that's spelled CANOPY.com. That's pretty cool. I heard that they might have shut that down. Is that true? I don't know. Atticatch has a theory. He says, I have a theory. Maybe the current Picard is the one that did not get in that fight in Tapestry. Wow, that would be, what a reveal that would be. Yeah, and he didn't become an admiral till much later. Wow. Sam O'Neill sends in another super chat. Yet another super chat. I'm going to buy Lord of the Rings hard copy as soon as I'm going to buy Lord of the Rings hard copy as I have not seen them. What? Okay. Sam O'Neill, here's what you got to buy. Hopefully you have a Blu-ray player. You have to get a Blu-ray player. Okay? You can get them cheap now. What you want, here, you know what? Since you're I don't want you to miss out. This is important. I will get you the link. I'm going to go to Amazon. I'm going to put it in the live chat. And you have to trust me on this. By the way, do you know that Jada Toys made Han's RX-7 radio controlled? I don't own it, but I need to get it because I need to have it for the Robservatory so I can drive it around during the show. Okay. Yes. Okay, this is what you need. Here it is. It's $57, but it's worth it. You need to get this box set. First of all, it's a great box set. You need this. I'm putting it in the chat right now. Here's the one you have to get. The extended edition of Lord of the Rings. I'm putting it in the live chat. And to be self-serving, here it is. To be self-serving, as everybody knows, the link won't fit in the chat because it's too long. Damn it. Well, you've got to get, here's what you want. You want the box set of all 3 Lord of the Rings movies on Blu-ray, and you want the extended versions. You've got to get the extended editions. That's what you need. So, indeed, that is what's important. Let's see. Alan Bennett sends in a letter. Oh, you know what? I already read Alan Bennett's letter. I already read that, and it was a great letter it was. So thank you for that. This is from Raymond H. Hello, Rob and fellow Robservationists. I'm a recent fan and admirer of your work. I appreciate the eloquence in which you express your ideas and judge science fiction with an even-handedness that I would expect from someone passionate about science fiction and good storytelling. Watching Star Trek Picard, I felt like there was something missing. It had been several years since I saw the series finale to Star Trek The Next Generation, but I still remembered it being the perfect bookend to a pretty solid show. Watching it again made me realize how solid the writing was and how, ironically, it also seemed like a counterpoint of the current iteration. When Q admonishes Picard about the latter's concerns about relatively trivial concerns, it seems like a perfect criticism of today's Trek. It's ironic that the perfect response comes before the question, or not so ironic given the nature of the episode. It warms my heart to see pockets of science fiction still fight to preserve a more optimistic future and ask the bigger questions about existence and our place in the world. Thanks for recognizing the good, critiquing the bad, and helping bring some sanity back to a world gone mad. Your fan, hiding in a CV-hardened bunker until 2022, Raymond. Well, Raymond, thank you very much. I mean, it's interesting because I think that we share a lot here with everybody. Everybody's having a good time. And I do get attacked a lot on social media personally for people that don't watch a show. They just see my tweets about Star Trek and they, yeah. So anyway, that's it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I got to tell you, it's been a bang-up show. And I'm going to bring an end to this Robservations episode. Robservations episode number 200. 362, my God. If you like these chats, please hit like. Please hit the notification button. Please subscribe if you can. And we'll keep this going. Tomorrow, I don't know. John Campy has called me twice since I've been on the show. I don't know if that's for tomorrow or the interviews that we're supposed to do on Tuesday. We might not have them. I don't know. I will be here tomorrow twice at least. There will be a Robservation show, and tomorrow will be episode 2 of Whining About the Movies with Elizabeth and I. We'll have to get another bottle of wine. And remember, the bottles of wine we are drinking, we are not sponsored by those companies, and I'm sure that, I guess they would like that we're showing up their wine, and we're going to do that tomorrow. So we'll be back, and that'll be fun. And I want to thank my, of course, great moderating staff, beginning with Mike Bodden, the mayor of Riverdale, Iowa. I want to thank the great Detective Jim Boyers, of course, Greg Smith, who's building a snowspeeder 1-to-1 scale that who knows where it's going to be, where it's going to be seen. I don't know when the Emerald City Comic Con's going on. WonderCon has been postponed. I mean, who knows where that snowspeeder might show up. Then, of course, there's Louis Yu and Jordy Lyons, the latest moderators to the staff. I want to thank them for being here and making the Post-Geek Singularity what it is. I also want to thank the Richard who is making sure that the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page is always fun and lively. I guess he's setting up a watch to watch with Nail and I, the movie that we're going to talk about on Whining About the Movies tomorrow. So that's pretty cool. So go on over to the Facebook page and join the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page and jump in. There's over 1,000 people there now. So it's always fun. I always jump on that board and post stuff there. That is great. And I want to thank everybody for letters. I want to thank you for the generous support of the channel. Sending letters or tips or super chats or any of that. It keeps us going here. And it's helping me increase and do more stuff in the Robservatory, which is always good. And I want to thank you all for supporting. And during this time where we're all in lockdown, and believe me, people, let me just stress, do you know how people don't get diseases, or they don't catch something? They don't go around other people. So I know it's kind of a bummer, but I'll try and be here to entertain everybody as long as I can. And stay safe out there, because I think the United States is going to see a rapid increase in all of this. We'll see where it's going to go. But if it follows the pattern that Italy is at now, it could get dire. Anyway, thank you all for being here. Stay safe. And remember, wait a minute. I'm not even on full frame. I can't go out on the show and not be full frame. Maybe I could go big. I could go big. Yeah, look at that. Woo! Ladies and gentlemen, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say I'm bringing an end to this Robservations episode number 362. Robservations, the show about something I'm bringing an end to it. I want to thank you all once again for being here. Have the rest of your day. As always, have it be, well, have a better day. Or have a ripping day. Is that what they say in Australia? Have a ripping rest of the day. And I'll see you soon.